Agenda item 17, which is our WSRF grant applications. Greg Johnson.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Greg Johnson, CWCB staff, Water Supply Planning Section. I am covering today for Craig Abou and Megan Holcomb for these three grant applications. So today we do have agenda item 17A through C, just three Basin Fund applications. So one from the Yampa White Green and then two from the Colorado River Basin. So agenda item 17A. That is not working. Is an application for $99,053 from the Yampa White Green Water Supply Reserve Fund account. This project is for the Yampatika Outdoor Awareness Association to assist with the Yampa White Green Youth Water Education Project. The association will develop and implement a K-12 focused youth water education program in the Basin. The project includes the development of curriculum-based next-generation science standards along with a comprehensive evaluation system to measure both the quantitative and qualitative success, both short-term and long-term for the program. The program will focus on increasing general water education, which includes highlighting the importance of water in the basin to all relevant stakeholders. So that includes agriculture, municipalities, recreation, business, community members, and the environment. These education programs will be a valuable opportunity to highlight not only the Colorado Water Plan, but the Basin Implementation Plan and all the good work that the Roundtable does in the basin as well. So the students and teachers will both be surveyed to ensure the successful implementation over the course of the 3-year period for the project. Unfortunately, the representative from the applicant, Joe Haynes, was unable to make it due to weather. Thankfully, they are getting good weather up there right now. And they have actually just recently secured all of their final match requirements, so everything is in place. Staff does recommend approval. Of course, this is an action item. And if approved, Craig Abou would be the project manager.
Thank you, Greg. Are there any questions for Greg about this project? I don't see any, so let's go ahead with staff recommendation.
Staff recommendation is for approval of $99,053 from the Yampa White Green Water Supply Reserve Fund Basin account.
Director Brown.
I'd like to move staff approval of agenda item 17A, please.
It's been moved by Director Brown and seconded by Director Trick to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 17A. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Greg. Please move on to 17B.
Sure. Agenda item 17B. Both B and C are requests from the Colorado River Basin account. 17B is a request for $20,000 from the Colorado Basin account to assist Roy and Shauna Fozzie, ranchers and shareholders of the new Malta Trina Ditch Company, in completing a washout pipeline project to mitigate significant erosion to the ditch. The project is located entirely on the Fozzie's property within the ditch company's easement. Due to very limited WSRF funding in the Colorado River Basin, the applicant took a $105,000 reduction from the original request and has actually come to the table with $228,700 of cash match, which includes a bank loan as well. So staff does recommend approval of $20,000 from the Colorado River Basin account. If approved, a new hire replacing Megan Holcomb will be the project manager for this.
Are there any questions for Greg about this project? Director Schwartz.
And thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate your recognizing the $20,000 contribution to a project given the limited resources in the basin.
Right.
So I move approval of staff recommendation for agenda item 17B for the Fozzie Washout Pipeline.
It's been moved by Director Schwartz and seconded by Director Brown to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 17B. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Great, thank you. And finally, agenda item 17C is a request for $40,000 from the Colorado River Basin account to help the Missouri Heights Mountain Meadow Ditch Company in their final phase of ditch efficiency improvements. The board has reviewed previous phases of this project with various aspects of funding. This phase, B2, will line over 5,000 acre-feet of canal to reduce ditch water loss, erosion, and salinity issues. Again, due to very limited WSRF funding in the Basin account, the applicants took a $140,000 reduction from the original request. The applicant and partners have provided a $482,300 cash and in-kind match, which includes an active $78,000 CWCB loan. Would also add that they have been very good customers over the years. They've borrowed $476,000 in total from the CWCB, along with a handful of other WSRF grants. So staff does recommend approval. If approved, Cole Bedford would continue to serve as a project manager as he has in other phases of the project.
Thanks, Greg. Are there any representatives of the applicant here?
I don't believe so. Yeah, they were unable to make it. Jim Pokrant, the chair of the Colorado River Basin Roundtable, was maybe going to be here, but I have not seen him.
Okay. Are there any questions for Greg about this proposal? Please go ahead with staff recommendation.
Right. Staff recommendation is for $40,000 from the Colorado River Basin account of the Water Supply Reserve Fund to help the Missouri Heights Mountain Meadow Ditch Company in their final phase of the ditch efficiency improvements for phase B2.
Thank you, Greg. Director Schwartz.
And thank you, Madam Chair, and I move approval of agenda item 17C per staff recommendation.
It's been moved by Director Schwartz and seconded by Director Yon to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 17C. Is there any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, we'll vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Greg.
Great. Yep. Thank you.
We are on to agenda item 18, which is our Water Efficiency Grant Fund. Ben.
Madam Chair, thank you. For the record, Ben Wade, Water Supply Planning Section, presenting agenda item 18. I'll try not to make this as long as yesterday.
We were just wondering if you were ready for this.
I got some high chews in my pocket if I need it. This is an application. Actually, let me start off with we actually rarely see water efficiency grants on the board agenda, and it's not because there aren't projects going out, but per the guidelines, any grant request that's under $50,000 is approved at the staff level. So we do provide that information and all the director report for each board meeting, but it's always good to get up and present these projects. This is a application from the Western Resource Advocates, and I'm sure many of us are familiar with their work. Part of their mission is to encourage urban water providers to use existing water supplies more efficiently, and WRA has come in previous years to help us out. They've put on some workshops. For instance, they did some tap fee workshops for water providers, I think about 2 years ago, and so they've been good partners. This current proposal is to provide technical assistance to municipalities and water providers who don't have the resources and the staff to implement meaningful efficiency strategies, and or they may not have full knowledge of the opportunities available. And so WRA is going to meet this challenge with providing some webinars and some workshops and focusing on the areas that are going to have a growing population over the next few years, and working with those entities to help them with implementing some meaningful water conservation strategies, as well as help them out in grant writing, whether it's the CWCB or other agencies. With us today is Cheryl Ream, who is WRA's Water Planning Deputy Director, and I'd like to invite her up to the lectern to answer any questions and provide some comments.
Thank you, Ben. Cheryl, welcome.
My apologies, Charlotte Ream.
Oh.
I can't even read my own writing. Long day yesterday.
We know you're still recovering. Charlotte, welcome. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Ream. I'm the Deputy Director for Water Planning at Western Resource Advocates. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the board for considering this application and thank Ben for recommendation on this. As he mentioned, we believe that being able to work with communities, partners, and collaborators across education initiatives, outreach initiatives, et cetera, that we can really cross these barriers and accelerate the implementation of high-impact programs in water efficiency, conservation, and land use integration. And these programs across Colorado will help meet the criteria and the measurable objectives of the Colorado Water Plan. So we really thank you for your consideration today. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ben or for Charlotte? Okay, seeing none, I think we're ready for staff recommendation.
Thank you, Charlotte. Staff recommends that the board approve a water efficiency grant to Western Resource Advocates for up to $105,427 for this project.
Director Brody. It's been moved by Director Brody and seconded by Director Yon to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 18. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next is agenda item 19, weather modification update. Andrew.
Afternoon, Board. Andrew Rickard, CWCB staff for the record. This is an informational item only, weather modification update. So in Colorado, we have 8 permitted seeding programs. North Platte, which is our aerial seeding program, Central Mountains, Vail, Beaver Creek, Grand Mesa, Gunnison Basin, Western Dolores Telluride, Western San Juans, and the Eastern San Juans. 1.2 million spent collectively a year in Colorado on the weather modification program. There's about 112 ground-based generators, and the one mistake I did notice is I said 25 remotes, and it's 12 remote generators. Just a little, the first couple slides have some text, then we'll get into some more fun slides, I promise. This is kind of just a breakdown of the funding statistics. $175,000 from the state of Colorado state funds. It's around $590,000 from local sources, ski areas, water districts, and then from the lower basin with the Programmatic Colorado River Agreement Fund, we just got awarded $450,000, which is the largest amount we've ever received. So yeah, in water year 2020, the agreement establishing programmatic funding for the Colorado River Basin weather modification. This is a breakdown of the 4 agencies we received money from. You can see California's 6th agency committee, they had to give $143,333.34. So I'm still repairing relationships with them because everybody else got only paid 33 cents. For a total of $450,000. So what this money goes to that we received from the lower basin, this is kind of a breakdown of that. The majority of it went to extend operations, basically just being able to run our seeders longer and for a better duration of time, which is what we need in cloud seeding. Support program upgrades, implement new program upgrades, studies, which I'll get into a little bit later, And the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission, they give $20,000, but their money goes to just the Western San Juans and Eastern San Juans for a total of $450,000. So extending the ops was increased significantly. This is something that the Lower Basin really wanted to see. They just wanted to make sure they felt like in the past they had kind of cut down the money for just general operations. So they wanted to make sure we had the money to run the generators when we need to run them. Supporting new remote generators. We are studying to fabricate a new remote generator that will be in the St. Vrain Left-Hand Water Conservancy District area. An icing rate sensor, high-resolution webcam is going to be installed in the Winter Park. We paid off the radiometer, and we also are funding a study to study the last 5 seasons of data we've collected from the radiometer. So we moved the radiometer to the Gunnison Basin. It was installed near Ohio City, located about 9,000 feet elevation. This will be managed by Stephanie Beal with Northern American Weather Consultants. The radiometer site will be looking at the mountains that melt directly, that feeds Blue Mesa Reservoir. And what the radiometer does is it measures vertical profiles of weather data to monitor atmospheric information, temperature, relative humidity. Basically, it detects supercooled liquid water in the clouds, and how Joe Busso used to say it is how juicy the cloud is. And with this last payment, we now own the radiometer. So the CWCB owns a radiometer now, which is pretty cool. So with what we decided to do with the money we received from the Lower Basin is initially we were going to fabricate a generator for the St. Vrain left-hand watershed. But on second thought, what we decided to do was a study, and I know that you can't really see that word, but basically what we're going to do is with Desert Research Institute, we're going to perform a study to see exactly where the best place to put this radiometer is, or not radiometer, the remote generator, because it's going to be the first time we're going to try to seed 2 different watersheds with 1 generator, which I think is the way to move into the future with weather modification and get cross-basin collaboration. This is the Hesperus. This is where we just sited a new remote generator this year. You can see it's west of Durango, if you can see that. The Hesperus ski area, which was an ideal spot, high up in elevation, which is a benefit of the remotes. You can put them very high up. Here's a picture. That's the DRI generator, remote generator. You can see it's like a box that they can just tow out, which makes it so they can move them around very easily, which is a plus. You can see top, that's where the solution would get burned out. And those are the install guys. And we affectionately named this the Busto remote. Another picture of the Busto remote. So another thing going on is we are extending the permit for the North Platte Basin for the seeding in the Never Summer Mountain Range. Staff is currently working with the AG, reviewing their operational record, making sure everything looks good. Once approved, Director Mitchell will sign it, and we're aiming for a sign date to have the permit begin by December 1st. I showed this slide last time. Basically, during the snow season, every day I get an email from NRCS, and these are all the snow tells, all those little circles are snow tells around the state of Colorado. This is of yesterday. We don't have much snow right now. We don't have to worry about avalanches right now. But this was one from last year, and you can see green is an area we can seed. Yellow is, seed with caution. And then the red are areas where we should maybe suspend seeding. Some criteria of the suspension is December 1st, if we're at 175% of snowpack, we will suspend. January 1st, 175, February 1st, 160%, March 1st, 150%, and April 1st, if we're above the 140% of snowpack, we will suspend operations. We also suspend operations if flood, blizzard, severe thunderstorm, or avalanche danger. And also I want to note that with this suspension criteria and the dates we have for permits, if we get to April 1st and we're nowhere near that suspension criteria, we can allow the contractors to extend operations to get a little bit more benefit out of the cloud seeding season. This is a picture of Red Mountain Pass from last year. These are things we try to avoid with suspending. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this spot where the snow shed. So this was on March 2019, and that Red Mountain Pass was actually closed for 19 days. There was 21 slides reaching the highway, 3 feet average snow depth on the highway, with a range of snow depth between 10 and 60 feet across the highway. Just another picture of that portion of Red Mountain Pass. So far, this cloud seeding season, we have had one very brief operation, ops in the Keystone area, in the Winter Park area. Talking to Frank with DRI, it looks like we might have a probability tonight to extend operations, but so far around the state, there's been hardly any seeding. And I talked to my contractors, and they said that this time of year, that's pretty normal, but it does seem like every season, it keeps getting pushed back a little bit farther and a little bit farther, probably due to climate change. I wanted to just show real quick on these slides. You have an IPC remote generator on the far left. In the middle is the DRI. And then on the right is a manual generator. And what I'm really trying to do going forward with this program is replacing these manual generators with remotes. The remotes can be sited at much more ideal locations. They can burn up to 26 grams of silver iodide solution an hour. With the manuals, it can only burn 6. And yeah, just the strategic placement of the remotes makes them much more ideal. This was from the Inventory and Assessment of Colorado Weather Modification Programs. Basically just goes over, this was before we had the North Platte. This was a study that was done by Wilson Water Group, basically saying which programs we can make upgrades to and with what equipment. And you can see that the remote generators are by far one of the best options and viable for every single program. And finally, I wanted to end on a note that, so these remote generators can be controlled with just a tablet. You can turn them on whenever you want. You can set a timer to turn them off. While the manuals, you have to go out and manually turn them on. And I was wondering, who wants to call this guy at 2:30 in the morning to have him go turn on his generator in the snow? I don't know if he'd like that. And I just think there's much more clarity with the remotes, more accountability. You can see exactly how much solution we're burning, when we're burning the solution, and it will better progress the data behind weather modification. And that's it for my portion for what's going on in the state. And now Frank Mcdonough with Desert Research Institute is going to give you an update on the science.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello, Frank. Please introduce
Hello.
yourself for the record.
My name's Frank Mcdonough. I'm a research meteorologist with the Desert Research Institute, and I also run the cloud seeding program. And so I'm here Andrew invited me to talk to you guys about sort of some of the background science that relates to cloud seeding, just so you have an understanding of what this is all about. So just as everybody knows, snowfall over the Rocky Mountains in the Colorado provides most of the state's water supplies. And this snowfall over Colorado is also critical for the water supplies for the lower Colorado Basin in the southwestern states. And here's a shot of Lake Mead, and Lake Mead's been flirting with the crisis level, I guess, where Arizona's going to get curtailed if it goes below, drops another couple feet. So it's really important to keep this Lake Mead filled up at least above this certain threshold. So that's why the lower basin's throwing money up here for cloud seeding, because that's a concern of theirs. So this plot shows the percent of water that reaches the Imperial Dam. That's where the pipe or the canal that Arizona and Southern California pull the water off to go into their various states. And this shows where the origins of that water is. And you can see that Colorado is the primary source. More than 50% of the water reaching the lower basin actually starts in Colorado. So these winter storms that cross the Rockies, they produce sub-freezing clouds, and the sub-freezing clouds are responsible for that snowfall. So now I'm going to kind of climb in a little bit more on what the heck is a sub-freezing cloud and what goes on in them that makes them possible to be seeded. So what are sub-freezing clouds? Well, sub-freezing clouds, they're collections of either liquid water drops and or ice crystals, and these are within cloud layers or moisture saturated layers, and the air temperatures are below freezing. And the liquid water drops actually are more likely to exist in these clouds as temperatures decrease down to about minus 15 degrees C, which is +5 Fahrenheit. And then once the temperatures get below that, you start to form more ice crystals in these clouds. So these clouds that are warmer than minus 15 C are full of water drops. These water drops do not precipitate. They just kind of hang up there as a fog bank. So how do liquid water clouds form? Well, moist air is lifted, it cools, the relative humidity increases, and as the relative humidity increases, the water vapor starts to condense into droplets. But it won't condense into droplets unless there's some dust particle or an aerosol. These can be sea salt, smoke, dust, but we need some piece of aerosol in the atmosphere to form these cloud drops. And here's an example of what that might look like. So on the left-hand side of that plot is what clear air would look like. And so you have your relative humidity less than 100%. That big block thing is a cloud condensation nuclei. That's the dust particle that will allow a drop to form. And then you can see the H2O vapor just floating around. So if you were looking at that outside, it'd be a blue sky day. If a cloud formed, the relative humidity reached 100%, and the water drops start to form, but they have to form around that dust particle, the CCN. And so the sources for these cloud condensation nuclei, there's natural sources, things like volcanoes and sea salt from waves breaking, and then there's also man-made sources, such as air pollution particles and things from power plants and things like that. And the number of these CCN actually affects what the clouds end up looking like. And these sub-freezing liquid water clouds also, not only, I've already said, they decrease the precipitation efficiency, and they're the definition of a seedable cloud. And they also are the same types of clouds that are responsible for aircraft icing accidents. And here's a bunch of shots of air icing, the super cooled sub-freezing water drops that have accreted on aircraft. So moving on, ice crystal clouds. So how do ice clouds form? Same idea, air is lifted, the relative humidity increases. We initially form a cloud droplet, and then once the cloud droplet forms, then if there's an ice forming nuclei, which is a aerosol that has the same molecular structure as ice, you'll end up forming ice crystals. And these really, in natural clouds, you won't really see these until the temperatures cool below minus 15 degrees or so. And the source region for these aerosols are usually desert areas over Asia. So actually you need a dust storm over the Gobi Desert to get a snowstorm in Colorado. So this is really the key point to why cloud seeding works. It's easier to form a water drop, but if you can get an ice crystal to form in the same type of cloud as a water drop, the ice crystal is going to grow as the water drop gets depleted. And so there's two ways that can happen. One is if we form an ice crystal, like if you look on the left-hand plot up at the top, a small baby ice crystal formed. As soon as that forms, the water starts evaporating off that water drop that was in the cloud, and the ice crystal grows and the water drop shrinks. And we call that deposition. A second thing that can happen is if an ice crystal forms, it'll start to fall and it'll crash into water drops and collect those water drops, and then you'll end up with a snowflake that looks like a styrofoam ball, which is what you're actually seeing out there today. And so they're the two different ways that snowflakes can grow in a cloud with water. So what is cloud seeding? Well, cloud seeding is a change in the number or size of cloud drops or ice crystals due to different aerosols entering the cloud. And there's two types of cloud seeding. One is called inadvertent. That's when you're not trying to change the cloud, but you do anyway. And then there's planned, which is what cloud seeding is. And so inadvertent cloud seeding is done every day. We all do it. This is a shot, it's kind of hard to see, but this is a shot of some stratus clouds off the coast of California and Oregon. And you can see these lines in there, and those lines are actually changes in the cloud structure from diesel exhaust from freighters coming over from Asia. And so there's just a great example of humans changing the clouds, not on purpose, but just as an effect of what we're doing. And I don't know if you can see this. This was a study done at Colorado State about a decade ago. And what they were showing was what's the effect of air pollution over Denver on the efficiency of clouds to produce snow. And the key point here is that there are areas where the clouds have crossed Denver are decreasing in efficiency by up to 30%. So places like Morrison and places in the mountains downwind of Colorado Springs actually are seeing decreases in precipitation of up to 30% from air pollution. So this is an interesting problem that I don't think people really understand. But we're here to talk about planned cloud seeding. This is when we're actually trying to purposely convert clouds from water drops to ice crystals. And so what we do is we introduce special ice-forming nuclei, special dust particles, into clouds that have the sub-freezing liquid water drops. And we usually want them to be warmer than about 5 degrees Fahrenheit because that's where these clouds form. And so when we do that, we can form the baby ice crystals, and then once we form the baby ice crystals, they'll grow up into big ice crystals and they'll fall out as opposed to floating by the mountains and not adding to the snowpack. And here's just a little visual example of that. You can see this picture on the lower left is a foggy, sub-freezing cloud, just all tons of small water droplets. It's just sitting there. Sometimes you'll see the little ice particle or little particles form on the pine trees if you get up in the foothills when you see this kind of stuff, but there's no precip. So if you can introduce some embryonic ice crystals in there, you're going to grow ice crystals, and they're going to grow big enough to scoop out all the water, and they're going to fall out to create additional snowfall. So that's what we're trying to do with cloud seeding. And so there's been a few studies over Colorado. There was a study done by NCAR that looked at data from 2000 to 2008. They looked at the northern and central mountains in Colorado, and it showed that most of these mountains are highly seedable, especially the Front Range, but the Flat Tops, the West Elks, the Elks, and the Never Summer are all seedable locations, and they are seedable. More than half the storms are seedable. And then in the southern Colorado, southwest, the San Juan Mountains are also very seedable. Here's a plot of a study we did that shows the altitudes where you would be able to seed for a particular storm in 2016. And those X's show where the different cross sections are. And we use this to help the vendors decide when and where to seed and how high they need to reach to get into the proper parts of clouds. So how do we seed? Well, we introduce silver iodide dust, and we do that with a burning chamber and a cloud seeding generator. So this dust gets up into the clouds, it creates the embryonic ice crystals, and then when the ice crystals form, like I showed, they'll start to convert the cloud from from water to ice, and then we'll get extra snowfall. And there's just a shot of a chunk of silver iodide, and that silver iodide's a naturally occurring element. It's not, people like to think it's a chemical and some artificial thing, but it's actually just a chunk of rock that is ground up, and then when we burn it, it forms very small aerosols that form ice crystals when they get into the proper parts of clouds. So there's two primary methods to cloud seed. One is ground base, which is mostly what's done in Colorado. That's when you're releasing the silver iodide from the ground. And the idea there is you want to get the silver iodide from the ground into the clouds. And so the clouds have to have the certain temperatures that you can hit. You got to know the sub-freezing water drops are there. You need to have the correct winds. And it's basically you got to wait for the storm to come in and have the right conditions to do it. The other method is aircraft. Aircraft, you can decide where to do it. You can go to different altitudes. You can back up or move forward. So that's the good news. The bad news is it's costly, and the aircraft's only able to do 2 to 3 hour blocks of flight before they have to go in and refuel. So the ground-based generators can run for 12, 15 straight hours, where the aircraft stuff is you got to just really thread the needle, and you can get maximum bang for your buck, but you can't do it that often. So Andrew showed this. It's just like an example of a cloud seeding generator. This is one of our generators. This thing's built for the Sierra Nevada snowpack. So Sierra Nevada, we get a lot of snow. We get heavy snow. It's dense, and when it melts, it kind of falls down the hill. So we get everything enclosed in a box there, and my wife and I duke it out. She thinks Colorado skiing's better, but I err on the side of Sierra Nevada. So. But anyway, that's the box, and then the seeding solution, all the consumables are inside that box. So if there happened to be a spill, everything would be contained inside that box. And then there's just a couple trailer wheels that go on that thing. So we wheel it out, we stake it down and pull the wheels off and put a little fence around it, and it's ready to go. And we have modern electronics, and we have satellite communication, so we can call the thing. And like Andrew said, we're releasing 26 grams of silver iodide per hour. Silver's a semi-precious metal, so obviously you don't want to release that stuff when there's nothing going on. So we're babysitting this 24/7, and we only run it when the cloud conditions are right. So we'll run these things in the middle of the night and kind of just watch. So where the manuals, they turn them on at 10 and let them go all night and turn them off at 7. So here's a few questions, and you may have some more. These are common cloud seeding questions that I get when I present these projects. So the first one is, does it work? Obviously that's a big question. When you tell people you can make it snow, they kind of call BS on that. So cloud seeding's been done for almost 70 years. The statistical results, that's when you look at a bunch of different data, shows that you can increase the snowpack by up to 15%, and the stream flows up to 8%. And so here's just a few examples of some of the projects that had long-term data and had good funding to do the statistical analysis. And then another way you can do the analysis is actually physical validation. And in that case, we look at actually case studies. And in this case, this was in the Sierra Nevada. We went out and actually captured snowflakes, and then we measured the amount of silver iodide we collected, and we can see that in the places where we see the increased silver iodide, we're seeing those if you look at the far right-hand shot there, that's a picture of what a seeded snowstorm looks like. And so we feel pretty comfortable. And then we also have high resolution precipitation gauges where we know the cloud seeding plumes at that spot, and we're measuring the snowfall rates, and then we're also capturing the snow and looking for silver to make sure that we actually hit the target area. So that's a way you can prove in an individual storm that you seeded, but it's hard to prove the overall runoff over an entire winter using this method. Are there safeguards built in? Andrew already went over this. First of all, the silver iodide has been studied dozens and dozens of times, and there's no environmental impacts. The silver iodide is an uncharged molecule. It does not disassociate in water. It's insoluble, so it falls to the ground, stays as an uncharged molecule, and it's not slurped up by any flora or fauna. So it's just a piece of dust that lands in the dirt, and that's it. And then, as you know, the suspension criteria, Andrew already went over that. So the last question, which is one you're probably going to hear from the Eastern Plains guys, is does cloud seeding steal moisture? And this thing just, no matter how many times you talk about it, it just doesn't go away. Because people think of it as a river. So, if you have a river and you pull out a little diversion, the rest of the water going down is less. But in the atmosphere, most of the water is vapor. It's not even coming down. It's just humidity that goes by. And so it's just flowing by. So if you form a cloud, if you start out with all water vapor, you form a cloud, 20% of that water vapor converted into cloud, 80% of it stays as vapor. So 80% of it's not even in the cloud. Then if the cloud starts precipitating, usually a cloud's efficiency is about 6%. So 14% of the humidity never even comes out of the cloud. It just sits in the cloud and then disappears when the cloud sublimates. So 6% comes out, 80% of the humidity is still water vapor. If we seed it and add 10%, then we increase the precipitation efficiency to 6.6% of the total humidity instead of 6%. And the water vapor is still the same, and the cloud was more efficient, so less of the humidity stayed in the cloud. And when the cloud goes by, 99.4% of the water vapor that was there before anything happened is going by. So the cloud seeding took out 0.6% of the relative humidity, and that'll be recharged in a matter of probably 20 miles from just ground sources. So here's an example. If you started out with 55% RH, you would end at 54.5% RH. So I don't think most instruments can't even measure that difference. And so anyway, I'll stop there. That was a lot of stuff. So if you have any questions, I'd be glad to entertain them.
Thank you, Frank. It's very helpful. Are there any questions? Director Schwartz.
Thank you. You were talking about pollution effects. What about forest fire particulates? Does that influence snow one way or the other?
It does. The thing is, usually the fire season doesn't overlap with the snow season per se. There's an interesting study, though, showing that actually the burnt parts of the trees are actually the black stuff falls onto the snowpack, and it's accelerating the melt. So that's actually a big problem. But there's been some studies where they've captured smoke and tried to see how, if they increase or decrease ice and precipitation, and the consensus is it probably decreases precip. It puts way more aerosols up. There's a lot more droplets forming. The droplets stay small. They're less likely to have an ice nuclei in them, so it probably decreases the efficiency.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Director Trick.
I just wanted to say thanks for that presentation. It helps to have us understand how that works, and we're really interested in this in the North Platte. So the more studies and the more science we can wrap our heads around, the
yeah, I mean
better off
that's
we are,
I know that's a big dump of stuff there. So feel free to contact me offline ever if you want to talk about anything. So
yeah, just thank you.
sure, my pleasure.
Director Anderson.
I find this very interesting because it really is a new supply for us. I'm curious, can you, I don't doubt you can make it snow, but can you make it rain?
Well, if you did it with, say you did it with, the actual active process, at least the way this is done, is done in the sub-freezing part of the cloud. So if you flew up to 20,000 feet in a summer thunderstorm and created more ice crystals, and then if they melted at 14,000 feet, and then that would obviously be rain. There are some methods to try to increase, to do, like some clouds never form ice, they're all water. And there is some methods to try to release these big salt aerosols that create some bigger drops. And then the idea is those drops will start to fall and collect the smaller drops. And that's a method to try to create rain from all liquid clouds. And that's usually more of something that's done in more of a tropical type location. There are active programs to try to decrease hail also. And the idea there is you put these silver iodides in, you get a lot more ice forming, and then that makes the hail smaller, and it also makes it come out a little earlier. So the idea is you can maybe reduce the golf ball size crop killing stuff down to maybe, pebble size hail, but a lot more of it. And so there are some methods that are done in summer.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both very much for the update. Okay, we are on to agenda item 20, which is the Bureau of Reclamation Water Smart grant. Alex.
Good afternoon, Brian McPherson, CWCB staff. There we go. This is agenda item 20, the ArcDSS Colors of Water and Forecasting Tool Water Smart Grant official resolution. I am here seeking an official resolution in support of a phase 2 project of ArcDSS in order to receive federal grant money. And I couldn't resist after seeing baby pictures this morning for what I'm thankful for. Little Ginny. There's us enjoying some Grand County snow back in October. Okay. So the project is the Colors of Water and Forecasting Tool for the Arkansas River Basin. This is phase 2 of the admin tools section of ArcDSS, and it builds upon a phase 1 tool, which I'll tell you a little more about. It's a joint project between the CWCB, DWR State Engineer's Office, and DWR Division 2, which comprise the ArcDSS team. This tool will display the colors of water in the Arkansas main stem and main tributaries at all structures in the river, which will require modeling of transit loss and transit time, and into the future, which will require forecasting. I've included a copy of the grant proposal in the board materials, but I'll forgive you if you missed it. I think it was around page 1200 of your packet. The project budget is for $300,000 for a contractor, as well as in-kind support from the CWCB, DWR, and OIT. And that in-kind support will mostly focus on building the tool in the Hydrobase data platform and OIT web platform, so that the tool will be transferable to other basins in the state once we develop it in the Arkansas. So we're trying to avoid the kind of the one-off project problem where we build a tool and it's only applicable one time. So this will hopefully in the future be transferable to other basins around the state using state staff to make that transition. So here's a screenshot of phase 1 of the tool. It's a web mapping application with tables and figures showing the colors of water. Currently it shows the colors, and by color I mean use type, accounting, ownership of the water at 11 main stem gauges in the Arkansas. So that the phase 2 of the tool will show the colors at all head gates, which came from user feedback from phase 1 that a better spatial resolution would help water users, as well as into the main tributaries of the Arkansas. And we also plan to, it currently shows the colors today and back in time, but the next phase of the tool will use hydrologic and operational forecasts to forecast the colors about up to a week into the future, which should help water users and transparency and communication between the water users and the DWR Division 2 office. So the grant is a Bureau of Reclamation Water Smart Applied Sciences grant. I know it's a little unusual for CWCB staff to be applying for grants, but it's a cost share agreement for $150,000 with a 50% match. It's a 2-year agreement. We submitted the application on October 30th, and this official resolution is required from the board within 30 days of submission. We've committed $150,000 of our own funding from the 2018 Projects Bill ARCDSS funding for this project, which has been reserved for this project. And the project has support from the Arkansas Roundtable, Southeastern Colorado Water Conservancy District, DWR Division 2, and the DWR State Engineer's Office. So the official resolution is required to verify the 4 following items. The identity of the official with legal authority to enter into an agreement, that's me, Brian McPherson. The board of directors, governing body, or appropriate official who has reviewed and supports the application, that's you, the board. The capability of the applicant to provide the amount of funding and or in-kind contributions specified in the funding plan, and that the applicant will work with Reclamation to meet the established deadlines. So I have the text here. This was also provided in your board packet. I'm not sure if I need to read it or if it essentially just verifies the 4 things I just said, or if we can take questions and vote on it.
Let's do that. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Are there any questions about this item? Director Schwartz.
I think this is such a great tool. It's just fantastic. And wondering about the application in the other basins. You were talking about the Rio Grande Basin and the Colorado basins to, again, track and especially shepherding conserved water to the state line. So I just am wondering what the next steps are with regard to the grant.
The next steps would be hopefully receiving the grant, moving forward with the Arkansas project, and then building it. We'll build it in such a way that DWR, State Engineer's Office, has a team, and they work with OIT closely, which is the information technology team for the state, that have built projects like this before and maintain projects like this. So transferring it to them so it can be used in the Colorado, South Platte, you name it, potentially in the future if there's a request from water users, the roundtables, for such a tool.
Director Goebel?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I've stated it before a few times at board meetings, but we love our new toy, and it's been very helpful, and especially the visual part of it. It's been great. And if we can get some federal funds to help further that, then even better. So if there's no further discussion, I move to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 20.
It's been moved by Director Goebel and seconded by Director Schwartz to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 20. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Good work, Brian.
Thank you.
No. Okay, we are on to I'm sorry. No. We're on to agenda item 21, ATM grant with Alex.
Hi, for the record, Alex Funk, CWCB staff. This item is the ATM Program Planning and Development Project. This was one of the severance tax projects that was approved back in January for $70,000. I'm here today. This is just an informational item for the board, kind of talking a little bit about this project, overview, and sort of a recent update as we kind of get underway with it. So I guess the update being that we hired the contracting team just a few weeks ago. And so we were able to hire a team that consists of Westwater Research, Colorado Water Center at Colorado State University, JUB engineers, and Fisher, Brown, Bartlett, and Gunn will be the project leads on this. And really the goal of this project is twofold. One is to sort of begin a process of assessing progress made on ATM goals in the water plan that have been completed since 2015. And those are, I've listed the two goals here. The first being that 50,000 acre foot goal or sharing water through voluntary ATMs by 2030. And then this other goal that, sort of is another objective that's listed in the water plan, but that ATMs compete with, if not outperform, traditional water transfers. So a big part of this effort will kind of be just sort of assess how, the CWCB, through its different grant programs and resources, is making progress in terms of addressing those goals. The second part of the project will really kind of be evaluate new approaches to promote ATM. So currently we do have the grant program, but we'd be looking at, are there additional resources or types of programs that we could potentially look at in addition to financial resources that could help facilitate ATM development. This is really going to be modeled after the work that Kevin Reedy's been doing with the land and water use workshop type model, kind of bringing different stakeholders together to talk about this issue and kind of look at potentially training and other sort of approaches to encourage ATM development. And then, as we talked a little bit about yesterday, this project will definitely be in line with other BIP and water plan update efforts. And just like a quick overview of the scope of work, so there will be an advisory committee formed as part of this project. This committee will be made up of various water professionals around the state that represent different sectors, different basins, and are individuals that have experience working on ATM projects. And the role of this committee will really be to kind of give feedback throughout the process, help kind of coordinate the interviews and focus group components of the work, and then ultimately kind of workshop some of the concepts and ideas that come out of the discussion. There will also be a Basin Roundtable engagement component of this. This will be really designed. Currently, it's set up as two different meetings, so there'll be sort of an intake meeting where the team meets with roundtable members that kind of get feedback on ATMs and sort of thoughts, concerns, or barriers that they see to utilizing this tool, and kind of a little bit, kind of work with them to kind of think about how ATMs can be used as part of their BIP updates as they kind of consider that process. There will also be a pretty in-depth status assessment in terms of ATMs. This will consist of a literature review, interviews with individuals that have worked on ATM projects across the state, municipal interviews, and then a quantification method. And this will sort of actually provide a more formal process of quantifying where we're actually at in terms of meeting that 50,000 acre foot goal. Then we're going to evaluate some potential new tools and incentives, as I discussed, potentially looking at some training programs and other options, kind of looking at different metrics that other Western states use to track success on their different water marketing transaction programs, what other sort of things other states' agencies are doing in terms of encouraging voluntary water transactions. And then finally, a report sort of capturing this process and this information that, tentatively we're hoping to get back before this board next November with a sort of final draft for feedback on that entire process. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have on this planning project. Really just wanted to give everyone a heads up that we are finally underway with this. I think it will provide some really useful information as we continue to track progress on those water plan objectives and hopefully inform the update processes over the next few years.
Thank you, Alex. Director Yon.
Looks good, Alex. Thanks for bringing that to us. There we go. Am I on? No. Okay. Anyway. Never mind. I'll talk. Oh, there we go. Yeah, thanks. Are you looking at any, I can't believe I'm saying this actually, but are you looking at any legislative solutions in this at all? Or is that something that might come out of it?
I think it'll depend on the feedback that we get from the roundtables and other partners. I mean, I think kind of going to this, we think we do have the tools and sort of legal framework to support ATMs. I think the broader question is, since we've created programs like the least fallow pilot and IWSA, I think the bigger question actually is, why aren't we seeing more utilization of those tools? And so anyway, we will explore that, but it won't be like the intent of the program to kind of do a whole scale change.
Right.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that is coming to our attention down in our area anyway is when a farmer changes their water right, many times they're subject to volumetric limits. And so and those volumetric limits, once they use it for this other use, whether it's a municipal or industrial use, once it's used, even when you go back to irrigation, you're held to those volumetric limits. So you don't even get to use your water like you used to, before you went through the change of use. So that's a big concern, that people don't want to go to water court and change their water rights because they're going to be held to this volumetric limit even when they're not using it for the new use. So that's something that maybe the legislature could help maybe a little bit with.
Yeah, and that was identified, I think, through the SPROG ATM feedback process too, and so we'll be kind of looking at some of that feedback as part of this project. Yep.
Director Schwartz?
Thank you. Good presentation. Just a question, is there a fiscal note associated with this, or is this just being rolled into our existing budget? How does this work?
So these were funds that were approved as part of the severance tax operational account package of programs back in January. So it's going to be funded through that program.
Director Brown?
Thanks, Alex. Just curious, when you put your advisory committee together, will you
Sorry.
you have something to say?
No.
Okay, sorry. Will you have statewide representation from each of the basins?
Good question, Director Brown. Yes, that is the intent, is that we would have representation from across the state, different sectors, and different backgrounds. So, I mean, ATMs are inherently pretty complex, so legal, economics, agronomics. We're trying to capture that full spectrum as part of this project.
Great. Any additional questions or discussion? Director Schwartz?
Thank you, because I think there's some innovations going on around ATMs, not having that traditional ag nexus. So I think that full representation of how it's being considered, utilized, and then from that, and if there is an advisory group, if there is a recommendation for changing the statutes, maybe that's the time to bring some of those suggestions forward.
Absolutely, definitely. We'll consider that.
Great. Looks like I think we wrapped up the discussion, so thank you very much for bringing this forward. Those of us that drive around the country aren't bothered by this background noise. It's just like AM channel. So we're going to move on to agenda item 22, ATM grants.
Yes. Okay. So agenda item 22, we have two applications today before the board from the Lower Arkansas Valley Water Conservancy District. And starting with, actually before I start getting into that though, we talked a little bit about the ATM program in detail yesterday. Just wanted to kind of just recap sort of how this program works.
Before you get too far down the road, Director Goebel would like to say something.
Yeah. Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to state for the record that I'm employed by the Lower Arkansas Valley Water Conservancy District, which is the applicant for the projects under this agenda item, and will recuse myself from the discussion and voting on this agenda item, and I'll leave the room right now.
Thank you, Director Goebel. Okay. Sorry about that.
It's okay. So the ATM program, again, these grants support sort of examining and assisting in the development of alternative transfer methods. They fund, several different costs associated with ATM project development, yet they cannot be used for preparation for a specific water court case that's outlined in the criteria. These are rolling applications and have a 10% cash match requirement. Some of the criteria that staff uses in terms of evaluating these grants, we looked to see how these projects build on previous grants and projects that have been funded through this program. It encourages on-the-ground projects, particularly those projects that provide useful and transferable information for future ATM efforts. This sort of key one, which is the project really addresses some of the key barriers to ATM development, and I've listed a few here, but those are potentially high transaction costs and certainty of long-term supply. We looked for projects that advance preservation of high-value ag lands and then largely increase understanding of ATM projects and sort of operational costs. And then finally, we really kind of just looked to assess whether or not the project helps further some of those ATM goals and objectives that I referenced earlier. So with that, I'll go kind of turning to 22A, which is the Super Ditch Operations and Administrative Program. This is the application is actually from the Super Ditch Company, but Lower Arkansas Valley Water Conservancy District is operating as the fiscal agent for this. The Super Ditch is requesting ATM funds to assist the company develop additional internal capacity to facilitate additional ATM projects. Especially, the Super Ditch is involved in, they have been involved in the Catlin pilot project. They were recently, as of this year, they got the IWSA approved for the city of Fountain, and they're also in the process of getting a second pilot project approved through the lease fallow pilot process currently. And so kind of what they're looking for is some help in terms of as more and more projects come online and that they're working on that they are sort of internally ready to handle all the different reporting and recording requirements that come with operation of these projects. They will also use some of these funds to design and construct some additional infrastructure to operate these projects, including augmentation ponds. And then this last bit, and I'll call up Mike Weber, who's with Lower. They'll actually work to collect some water quality information and other sort of ecosystem service benefits from that can be. So one of the things that we've identified as part of these projects is that there are potential benefits that accrue from them, including water quality, and so there will be a effort to sort of set up a monitoring system to evaluate that. And with that, I'll bring up Mike to answer any, or kind of describe that project in more detail and answer any boards or questions the board may have.
Thank you, Alex. Mike, welcome. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Mike Weber, Lower Ark Water Conservancy District. Sorry if you couldn't hear that first part. Mike Weber. Thank you guys for hearing this grant, and I'll kind of explain a little bit of the pieces in it. I'm kind of pinch hitting on the first part and here for the water quality piece. We have impaired waters for multiple constituents in the Arkansas Basin. As the water flows from Pueblo Reservoir down to the state line, those impaired waters need to be improved before Regulation 85 comes down. One of the identified sources of this is rotational fallowing or lease fallowing or dry up. We don't want to venture into dry up. We don't want that to happen. So we think rotational fallowing could get us to that mark where we need to get to. We've been doing research on a couple of farms, but we really want to expand this out, get to 6 total farms if we could, and show the benefit of rotational fallowing with some other pieces to get these waters off the impaired water body list for Regulation 85. And with that, I'll answer any questions on the grant or anything with it.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any questions for Mike or for Alex? Director Schwartz.
And thank you, Madam Chair. So just a quick question in terms of administration of these different lease fallowing operations. How is that working out with the individual ditch systems and keeping a balance in those ditches and flowing? And how's that working?
So I don't know if I can speak on behalf of the ditch company itself. I work as an administration of the actual project itself.
Right.
And I can tell you that one of the reasons that we've put this application together is because we've had some overusage of water at augmentation stations where we're not being able to exchange as much water as we possibly need to. We also have some recharge issues where we're timing the water in different ways that it may not actually come back. So from that perspective, we could really use some assistance for some more infrastructure to make it work. The canal has signed off on everything that we've done, and I won't speak on their behalf of whether they think it's been good or bad, but operationally, they have agreed to allow us to continue moving forward, and they appreciate what we're doing to try and find an alternative to buy and dry.
Director Anderson.
I just have a question out of curiosity. The farms that are participating in this, is it forage crops or row crops?
The farms that have been identified so far are mostly cash crop land, but there are actually a couple parcels that are rangeland grass crops. The grasses actually have to be killed off and completely tilled under before they can dry up this parcel of land, but it is primarily cash crops. I'm going to say alfalfa, wheat, corn is what you're looking at, but there are some other kind of forage rangeland type things on the back end on some identified parcels within the process, but that's not the typical piece.
Thank you.
Great. Any additional questions for Mike or for Alex? Okay.
Moving just to staff recommendation for 22A. Staff recommendation is for board approval in the amount of $255,460 for this grant.
Director Yon.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Mike, for being here. With that, I would move staff recommendation on agenda item 22A.
A second?
It's been moved by Director Yon and seconded by Director Schwartz to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 22A. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Alex.
So moving on to 22B, this is the Ag Municipal Conservation Easement Demonstration Project. A little bit of background here. So some early studies resulting from some of the early grants with the ATM grant program, and the water plan actually itself kind of talks a little bit about this barrier. One of the key barriers to ATMs is this issue with long-term reliability of supply for the end user. So like, why would a municipality go through all the effort and investment around an ATM without knowing that that resource is going to be around? And one of the tools that is still emerging and we're starting to see kind of come up across the state is this concept of coupling conservation easements with water transactions. And so, conservation easements protect or preserve working farms and ranches. They by imposing certain limits on that property that ensures that property is going to be protected in perpetuity. And the enabling statute around easements also allows for water to be tied to those properties as well, kind of recognizing that water is pretty critical to maintenance of irrigated ag properties that are protected through an easement. And so there have been a few different land trusts and groups across the state that have worked to kind of pilot this concept of adding leasing language to those easements to allow for not only tying those water rights to the property, but then allowing some leasing to other needs, be it in-stream flows or municipal uses. And so this grant would kind of continue to explore this concept by developing some model language for how these types of easements would work in the lower Arkansas Basin, as well as working to identify an actual project on the ground. And so with that, I'll bring up Lee Hancock, who's with Lower, and can kind of talk a little bit more about this grant and answer any questions the board has on it.
Thanks, Alex. Welcome, Lee. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Yes, I'm Lee Hancock. I'm the Conservation Program Manager at the Lower Arkansas Valley Water Conservancy District. And I just appreciate you taking a look at this project for the use of ATMs through a conservation easement.
Great. Are there any questions for Lee or Alex about this project? Director Schwartz.
And thank you. So you're with the Lower Arkansas
Yes,
Conservancy District?
Yes, that's
So
correct.
what land trusts are you working with, and how many parcels do you have under conservation easement now that are using this mechanism?
The Lower Ark is a certified land trust through the Division of Conservation, and we currently have over 50 conservation easements that we steward and monitor on an annual basis.
And just follow it, and of those 50, how many have tied the water to the easement, or have you done that?
We do.
since
We have one conservation easement that is in the Lease Fallow project currently.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Director Brown.
Yes, thanks. I just have a couple quick questions for you. I noticed that the budget we received doesn't reflect the totals that you're requesting. So I think we need some clarification around that in the budget category. Do you have that in front of you by any chance?
I do not. I did notice an error in the budget. There was a number that was not supposed to be in the budget, was in there mistakenly, but it did not impact the overall numbers, and I'm not sure if that is what you're referring to.
The $360,000?
There's a 160 number under the execution of the conservation easement, and that should have been omitted from the budget.
I have a total of $340,000 in my column. I think it obviously was just an error, but I think we need to correct that.
Sure.
And I'm a little uncomfortable with funding this easement prior to knowing what land you're purchasing and from whom. I think it's a little different than easements that I've seen in the past where you identify a landowner, the parcel of land, the characteristics that make the land worthy of a conservation easement, and then you look for funding afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why this grant application gives me a little pause.
Sure, and I can give you a brief summary of our selection process if you'd like, or.
Sure, that'd be great.
First, we work directly with the super ditch on what leases are active at that point with the municipalities. Once that's determined, it allows us to determine what canal system that we'll be working under. So then I identify landowners and parcels within that canal system. Then I work directly with the landowners to determine the size of the parcel, how many shares of the surface water rights are associated with that parcel. And then we also look at the location of that parcel and how it's going to impact the return flow obligations within the Lease Fallow project. And so once that process is worked through, the remaining parcels, I take that to our board and for a final selection and approval process.
If I may. So why not come before the board with an application that identifies that conservation easement and outlines, a little bit more detail about what we're using state money to conserve?
Sure. No, I can definitely work through that process.
Okay, thank you.
Director Schwartz?
So do I understand, Director Brown, we'd like to postpone the grant until there's a specific easement that's being proposed, or?
That
is
would be my
going to
preference, but I don't know if discussion's over with the other members.
Or could there be a hold on disbursement until a parcel and easement's identified? I mean, how does one proceed?
I guess if you're asking me, maybe Alex has a suggestion of how to go forward.
Yes, we did talk about this with the applicant, and I think they were open to addressing your concerns, Director Brown, in advance of the January board meeting, coming back with a revised application addressing sort of that parcel selection issue and any other, and fixing those budgetary kind of issues as well. And then we'll kind of reapproach a recommendation at that time.
Director Brody?
I'm just wondering procedurally, and this may be a question for our council, whether we should vote on the action that's in front of us, and then depending on the outcome of that vote, if the applicant wants to come back with a new proposal that specifies particular property, we would take up that action at that time.
Councilor Beatty?
If I understand the question correctly, I don't think you guys need a motion to deny the application now to come back.
But I'm not sure if it would be a motion, but do we need to act on the action item that's in front of us? Could the applicant simply withdraw it?
Table it.
Hang on one second.
We could motion to table it, perhaps?
Move to table.
Until January.
Okay.
I appreciate you guys having this conversation about thinking about the structure and coming back to it. And when I read the application, I was also uneasy about spending money on a project that's not detailed, because thinking of my own area where we live, I think that my constituents would want to make sure that if there was some sort of project that had some kind of leasing component, that everything was clearly outlined. I do get comfort in that the applicant is the Conservancy District. I think that gives appropriate local input and controls. And so anyway, thank you for your willingness to be nimble and your willingness to rethink the approach. And maybe if we're thinking about tabling it, that seems like a good way to regroup. I wonder also, I can respect that you have funding in here for staff time and legal expenses to develop the project. And so I wonder if a phased approach might be appropriate to go ahead and get you on the ground and get you running, and then have you come back to us once the property is totally identified. If you need a little bit of time for that, that would be a suggestion. Director Schwartz?
And thank you. I think those are great perspectives, and I guess if you already have the land trust in place, I assume you have staff and operating funds to be pursuing easements, so I wouldn't imagine that developing one more easement would require necessarily resources. But secondly, I guess I would like to also see what other conservation values might be fulfilled through the conservation easement besides just identifying and securing the water resource.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your consideration, and we'll work diligently to move forward with those suggestions. So.
Director Brown?
So I just have one more request of staff potentially, or the Attorney General's office. I did read the Colorado Open Lands document that discusses the benefits regarding ag to muni transfers when they're part of a conservation easement. And I saw that there's an opinion in there by a private attorney who I recognized, and then another attorney who I did not. But I think maybe if the Attorney General's office wouldn't mind reading that document and advising on if they think that that is a legitimate conservation purpose. I just want to make sure that we're doing something that works within the code in Colorado around that conservation easement.
Jen, do you have something to add?
Thank you. Jen Mealy from the AG's office. I did talk to Alex briefly about this, and I'd be happy to look into it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, Director Schwartz.
And thank you. With being on the board of COL, I believe that was a document to explore and the opportunity to utilize ATMs as opposed to being a firm position, if I can recall the document correctly. So I think that you're absolutely right. We should vet the concept and again make sure we've identified conservation values that fit the statutes.
Director Brody?
I was ready to make a motion unless others have questions or comments.
Counselor Beatty?
I don't actually think you need a motion. Just because you've listed something as an action item and you don't bring the business before the board, I don't think you need a motion to move it. I think you can just decide to push it to the January meeting in the absence of a motion.
Lee, have you and Alex received feedback that is useful and will help you with the path forward in January?
And yeah, I think just to clarify, we'll work on the budget and sort of process questions in the application itself in terms of identifying that parcel, and hopefully have a more detailed approach for that for the January meeting. And I'll also work with Jen and the AG's office on answering or getting some sort of documentation in front of you at that meeting as well, talking about the legal questions around this concept as well.
there anything to add? Okay. Thank you for coming, Lee. Thank you for making the trip and for
Thank you.
addressing us. Thank you. Okay, before we move into a quick break, I want to circle back to agenda item unnumbered. Board meeting dates. It looks like we've had a little bit of discussion offline about potential meeting dates in March, so I'm going to turn it over to Director Mitchell.
Yes, after some consultation with a few board members, we're suggesting the March board meeting dates be March 11th and 12th. TBD location.
All right, with that, we have an afternoon break scheduled, so we'll go ahead and take that break. And we're pretty well on time, so we'll come back around 3:10 and get going with agenda item 23. Thank you. All right, we are back and we're going to get going with agenda item 23, stock watering uses. Linda.
Good afternoon, Linda Bassi with the Stream and Lake Protection Section. This is agenda item 23, stock watering uses claimed under section 3792-1023B CRS. This is an informational item with no board action required. This item provides an opportunity for board discussion with staff, the public, and the Attorney General's office, not necessarily in that order. There are two attachments to our memo. One is staff's draft concept to address Division 6 1023B stock watering claims. There is also a position paper that was submitted by the River District to the board on the application of 1023B to pre-existing uses. That paper was received after we finalized our memo, so that is why there's no acknowledgement of it in staff's memo. But we thought it would be best to just put it in the packet with the memo so everything is in one place. So starting in 2014, CWCB staff and the Division of Water Resources have been talking with the River District and the Colorado Cattlemen's Association about the application of Section 1023B in administration of in-stream flow water rights. The statute applies to in-stream flow appropriations and not to in-stream flow acquisitions, and it provides that in-stream flow appropriations shall be subject to the present uses or exchanges of water being made by other water users pursuant to appropriations or practices in existence on the date of such appropriation, whether or not previously confirmed by court order or decree. CWCB staff has documented numerous uses claimed under 1023B in-stream flow water rights decrees over the years, and also works with water court applicants claiming a senior appropriation date for undecreed uses based on 1023B practices. We've worked with applicants who are both moving forward pro se or who are represented to process and memorialize these claimed 1023B uses in decrees we do that in about 30 cases every year. It's our understanding that the Cattlemen's Association and the River District initiated these discussions in reaction to the Division of Water Resources curtailment of undecreed stock watering uses during the non-irrigation season in Water Division 6. We think this was in 2012 on the Elk River as part of administering a decreed in-stream flow water right on the Elk River. We've had several meetings. The water users have told us that they considered their post-irrigation season stock watering uses to be decreed as part of their irrigation water rights. However, the Division of Water Resources has determined that post-irrigation season stock watering uses are not a decreed beneficial use under those decrees and curtailed those apparent undecreed uses during the water rights administration. We also have been told that the water users do not want to apply to water court to obtain a decreed water right for post-irrigation season stock watering use. And I want to point out, it's important to note that there are two separate issues here. The question of whether stock watering is an implied part of an irrigation water right is separate from how 1023B should be implemented. And this agenda item is not about the first issue. It's not about decree interpretation. Our focus today is to discuss what mechanism we can use to formally recognize uses that are claimed under 1023B that CWCB can pursue without requiring the water users to file a water court application. In 2017 and 2018, CWCB staff worked with the Division of Water Resources, River District, and Cattlemen's Association on developing a potential administrative procedure by which DWR, in consultation with CWCB, would review and document 1023B stock watering use claims and administer the stock watering use against an in-stream flow water right without water court determination of the extent of the claimed undecreed use. During that process, some questions came up internally about the authority of CWCB or DWR to determine the extent of those claimed uses, and that prompted legal review of the issue. Attorneys for CWCB staff and Division of Water Resources researched the question, and in late 2018 concluded that for the Division of Water Resources to administer an in-stream flow right is subject to an undecreed use under 1023B, that there must be court confirmation of the extent of the use, the time, place, and amount that existed at the time of the in-stream flow appropriation. We discussed that conclusion with the River District and Cattlemen's Association, and we, Southwestern Water Conservation District came into the discussion, and counsel for the River District and Southwestern have indicated that they disagree with that legal conclusion that court confirmation is necessary. So for us to move forward, based on the AG's opinion of the need for water court confirmation, and based on the fact that certain stock water users, they do not want to pursue a decreed water right, staff and the AG's office developed a conceptual approach to address this issue, which is attached to the board memo. We also provided this concept to the River District and Cattlemen's Association for discussion purposes. The concept is that CWCB would look at filing a water court application to obtain confirmation of 1023B uses, and let's assume they're stock watering uses, without adjudicating stock watering rights and without opening the underlying existing in-stream flow decree. We are proposing to do this to address the issues that we heard from water users in Division 6, to see if we could address these concrete on-the-ground issues. So the way that this process would work, and again, we're still trying to, we haven't worked out every detail of it, but the way we see it working is that these Division 6 stock water users who are unable or unwilling to file in water court to obtain a decree or court order to get that 1023B exception would work with CWCB staff to identify, quantify, and verify their claimed 1023B uses. CWCB staff would work with the water users to agree on the extent of use to which the underlying in-stream flow right would be subject, and we would also consult with Division of Water Resources to verify those uses, which is what we do when we work on it in the context of water court cases. Assuming that we had agreed on something and we're ready to move forward to water court, we think that we would want to bring it to this board to inform the board about it and get the board's go ahead to file the water court action. The action would be an application for determination of water right to ask the court for a determination regarding the scope of the previously decreed in-stream flow as against the identified undecreed uses under 1023B, and determining that the in-stream flow would be administered as junior to those uses. So there are a few things that this approach is not. It would not be a change of water right for the in-stream flow water right. It would not adjudicate a stock watering water right. It would be filed under a new case number. CWCB would not open its existing decree. And again, this wouldn't apply to acquired in-stream flow water rights. Just to touch on the River District's position paper, staff disagrees with many of the district's characterization of the issues and with several points made in the paper, but since they're going to get up and talk to you, we don't think we need to go into that at this point. But we did want to say that we also don't support a legislative approach to this issue as suggested by the district for a few reasons. Opening up the in-stream flow statute is risky and could result in unintended changes to the statute. The proposal could create the potential for conflict between CWCB and the Division of Water Resources. We think it lacks a few things that would need to be addressed, which would be to provide notice and opportunity for potentially affected water users to comment and raise issues. We would want to maintain the ability to process 1023B claims as we currently do in water court cases. And also, whenever we document and memorialize one of these 1023B uses claimed under 1023B in a water court decree, we have language that specifically addresses the fact that it's an individual subordination of the in-stream flow right to that use claimed under 1023B and doesn't result in a general subordination. And that's something that's very important that needs to be acknowledged in any process that we use. Staff believes that the proposed water court action we've described today could potentially be a better approach to this issue. It also would be a more timely approach. We could probably get that done sooner than legislation, but everything takes time. We recognize that, and we still do need to work through details. I know that several people have signed up to give public comment, and I can answer questions before I yield the floor to them.
Thank you, Linda. Are there any questions for Linda before we get some public comment? Okay, great. I've
Thank
got
you.
a handful of papers. Thank you, Linda. First up is Jason Turner with the Colorado River District.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would it be all right if Andy Mueller, the general manager for the district, and Mike Camblin also join me up here? Might just make things go a little bit smoother.
Great. And please introduce yourselves for the record.
I will, thanks. This is Jason Turner. I'm senior counsel with the Colorado River District. With me here today, I've got Mike Camblin with Colorado Cattlemen's, Routt County Cattlemen's, and the Maybell Ditch. I also have Andy Mueller, who's general manager of the district. And I first want to recognize, as Linda pointed out, we've been working on this for quite a while, and we understand that you've been briefed by your staff on a number of occasions on this issue. So we do appreciate the opportunity to come before you today. I also want to recognize Linda's work, Kaylee's work, the participation and leadership from Director Brown on this issue, as well as Jen Mealy with the Attorney General's office. In our opinion, well, I don't believe there is any dispute that pursuant to 1023B, in-stream flow rights are subject to pre-existing uses. I'd also like to point out that this will have no impact on the in-stream flow. By their very nature, these were pre-existing uses. This is water that was not in the stream when the CWCB did its calculation of the in-stream flow. 3792-1023B states that any such appropriation for in-stream flows shall be subject to the present uses or exchanges of water being made by other water users pursuant to appropriation or practices in existence on the date of such appropriation, whether or not previously confirmed by court order or decree. The River District and its constituents believe that the statute is abundantly clear. A water user with a pre-existing use is not required, nor should they be compelled, to have that right adjudicated or confirmed by the water court to take advantage of protections provided by the legislature. In 1981, when 1023B was adopted, that was Senate Bill 414, that was a compromise, and that's demonstrated by the remarks of then Governor Lamb. We included those remarks with our paper. We think it makes very clear that this was a compromise bill between water users, and at that time, despite the fact that the in-stream flow statute was less than 10 years old, there were already concerns about the expansion of the program. As originally proposed, the bill included a mechanism by which water users with these pre-existing uses would come in to get them decreed. We think it's incredibly instructive that because that provision was removed, that it was the legislative intent that these water users not need to go through that process. As Linda pointed out, we did attempt to resolve this issue by agreement on these pre-existing uses, and that determination would be made by the state engineer Kevin Ryan, who I failed to acknowledge earlier was also part of this discussion, and we appreciate that. As discussed earlier, we respectfully disagree with the conclusion that the state has come to. We believe that the state engineer authority is inherent in 3792-501, which allows the state engineer's office to administer, distribute, and regulate the waters of the state. And notice that doesn't say decreed water rights, it says the waters of the state. in accordance with the law, which would include 1023B, and the state engineer's written instructions and orders, which is exactly what we were working to with our administrative solution to this. We don't believe anything in 1023B would preclude an adjudication or confirmation of the pre-existing use. However, requiring that adjudication or confirmation is in direct conflict with the plain language of the statute and runs counter to that bargain that was reached in 1981. Additionally, requiring court confirmation may subject these water users to additional legal costs and come with unintended consequences. I believe Mike Camlin's going to talk to you a little bit about that. While some water users may choose to go out and adjudicate their rights and expend resources on attorneys and consultants in order to obtain this judicial confirmation, nothing in Section 1023B requires a water user to adjudicate a pre-existing use. In fact, the purpose of the statute was to ensure that these water users would not have to incur those costs. One of our other concerns is that, the in-stream flow program has benefited from a level of broad support for the most part. This recent interpretation of the statute has caused concerns in a number of corners of the state, and we are concerned that the support for the program is going to erode if we cannot come up with a solution for this issue. In March of this year, we proposed to CWCB staff a legislative amendment that would make abundantly clear that the state engineer's office has the authority to make these determinations. A copy of that legislative proposal was included with your materials. As Linda pointed out, it was not acceptable. We understand that the CWCB staff has presented you with their concept. We, again, appreciate those continuing efforts to address the issue, but for many reasons, we don't believe it offers a solution that will work for everyone. First and foremost, I'm going to point this out again, 1023B does not require court confirmation. That was part of the legislation when it was originally introduced, and it was pulled from the legislation. Second, the issue is not limited to Water Division 6. We have had concerns we've heard of concerns in Division 2, Division 4, Division 5. The Southwestern Water Conservation District is here today, and they'll be presenting on the issues they've heard in their district as well. And third, it's not solely limited to stock watering issues. There are a number of pre-existing uses out there other than stock watering. We are, however, mindful that some water users may want to take advantage of the staff's proposal. In order to not foreclose that opportunity, we would propose a statutory amendment that identifies that a water user could either have its pre-existing use determined by the state engineer's office. And I want to point out too, and I forgot to mention this, our original proposal would include a provision that would allow any aggrieved party, which would include the CWCB or a water user, if they were not happy with the state engineer's determination, to go to water court and have that determination reviewed de novo. But our current proposal would be that you allow folks to either have that determined by the state engineer, and even though it's not required, they could also, if they chose, go to the water court, and this would include going through the process that your staff has proposed to have that pre-existing use confirmed. Absent an administrative resolution to this issue, the River District believes that this statutory amendment would provide the most clear and concise and limited clarification of the law while preserving that bargain that was made in 1981. And with that, I'll ask for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Turner? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next is
Mike.
Mike Camlin.
How are you? Good. I know a handful of you, not everybody. If you want to know me better, let me know. Come see me. So I'm not going to bore you with lawyer mumbo jumbo today. I'm going to give you maybe a little bit of history lesson today on the on the side of the ag producers. I'm a board member of the CCA. I also sit on the round table with Jackie in District 6, the Yampa White Green. And I have been president of the Mabel Irrigation District for about 26 years, or 20 years, I'm sorry. And it's all one big mumble jumble. At any rate, I need to give you a little history about the ditch. So the ditch was actually started in sometime around 1895 to 1897 is when it was first turned on. The people of Maybell at that time and are still today were livestock producers. They're not farmers. It's greasewood flat, a lot of alkali ground. We do not make our income off of farming. We make our income off of livestock. The ditch was actually started to support our livestock. We have two water rights. One is post-compact and one is pre-compact. 4 or 5 years ago, we were contacted by the division engineer that we were wasting water. We needed to do something about this. This was in October. And I had told her, I said, well, we're running water for livestock. And she had mentioned to me at that time that you do not have a livestock decree, which blew me away. I didn't have any idea. And so I went back to some of the older board members, and nobody had any idea what we had. We did not have a livestock decree. To be honest with you, we didn't know there was a difference. So we contemplated this for a couple of years, and we decided we probably better get one. So we decided to go ahead and get that process started. We started in December of 2016. And then, excuse my language, then the shit show started. So what happened was we applied for this water right, and during our first pre-conference, or our meeting with our referee, so to speak, we had made it abundantly clear we didn't want more water. We weren't asking for more water. We wanted to continually run like we always have been. We weren't really looking for a water right. We just wanted to water our livestock. That's all we wanted to do. So we thought everything was going to go good, and about 2 months went back through, and we hadn't heard back from anybody. Well, apparently there's some deal in the court called the, it's called the Colorado e-file system. The lawyers all know about it, but the layman people don't. Apparently they've been shooting these emails around, and they all got it, but we didn't. So they finally contacted us and asked us why we had not responded to this. So finally got into the loop, and we've all heard the term, you can take your horse to water, but you can't, or lead your horse to water, but you can't make him to drink. Well, that's, I thought everybody kind of figured that one out, but it's not true. Some of the comments, so we had two protesters. We had the Bureau of Land Management, and we had the Mount Werner Sanitation District, which is in Steamboat, over 100 miles away from us. Those two lawyers ripped us apart. Basically, they told us that we could not water our cattle during irrigation season, that we could only water it when the livestock water was running, which was in the fall, which, like I said before, we're livestock producers. That's what we do. We don't have a second revenue stream for our hay. Most of us don't. Like, I do not make money off my hay. I turn around and feed it to my cattle. At any rate, so once we got that cleared up, that we could run water, or we could allow our cattle to drink during the regular irrigation season, then they told us that during the livestock season, which was basically October through November, that we could only run water once a week. So the first thing that came to my mind was, I hope this guy didn't have pets, because I'm not going to let my cows not have water for the rest of the week. That's just not fair on them. So then we got that cleared up, that we could run all week. But then we could only run from 9 to 12. Well, if you know the ditch is 18 miles long. It takes about 12 to 16 hours to make that adjustment. Two, I'm not going to go down there and herd my cattle up to the ditch every day between 9 and noon and make sure they drink. Hence, you can lead your horse to water, but you can't make them drink. It's the same with a cow. So this went on for most of the summer and most of the fall also. It even came to the point where they got the water commissioners involved. We had to get the water commissioner down there once a week to measure our tailwater, to make sure that we weren't wasting water. They wanted us to prove how many cattle we had on the ditch, which on average, there's about 6,000 head of livestock, and I'm talking sheep, horses, cows, the whole 9 yards. So there's a lot of livestock that runs on the Mabel Irrigation District. So as this battle went through, we finally came to the conclusion that we were going to go ahead and get this right. But the one thing that we finally agreed to, because we were basically tired of fighting with these people, were we had to shut off between December 1st and January 1st. For 30 days, we can't run our water. Now, as far as I know, that's the only water right in District 6 that has that attached to it. It was just like they were out to get us. And so now we have a water right. It's a 2017 water right. The last and only call that's ever been put on the river went back, clear back to 1950. So it didn't really help us. So we're in a quandary about it. We still don't like the situation that we're in, but it is what it is. If we can come up with the money, we're going to maybe battle it a little more. But that was our experience with going to court to get water for something we do every day, have for over 125 years. The BLM is actually formed 46 years after we started running water down that ditch. And they told us the reason we couldn't run between December 1st and January 31st is because we had no historical records. We had historical records that we run in October and November, but we didn't have anything in December. And so I think these court things are really going to open up some things that could not be good to the ag industry. And I think this is something that we need to look at. So as far as the Colorado Cattlemen's is concerned, is we're behind these guys on this proposal, and we'd like you guys to look at it a little closer. People's livelihoods depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Are there any questions for Mr. Camlin? Director Hawkins.
Mike, thanks for sharing that with us.
Sure.
I have just a clarifying question.
Okay.
Was the CWCB involved in your case at all?
Yes. Oh, no, the CWCB? No, it was not. So this was not an in-stream flow matter.
Okay.
We had the Colorado River District involved and the Colorado Cattlemen's involved. We couldn't afford an attorney.
So this particular issue wasn't what there's a lot of numbers. The 102.3B issue that we're discussing today was not an issue in the Maybell Ditches case.
No, it isn't. But so the District 6 people, the people up in Steamboat, some of the people on the Elk River and so forth, they're the same way. They are not farmers. They did not get water rights to farm. They got water rights to support their cattle. And that's what I'm trying to get through, is that just because it is an in-stream flow, this is a whole issue, and it's statewide. It's not just District 6.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. That's helpful.
Director Brown?
I just wanted to further clarify that Mike's story, I think, also highlights some of the reasons why water users aren't just being stubborn by not wanting to go to water court, that there are a lot of individual issues that can come up and be very costly. And although some of us may say, well, you just go to water court and take care of it, you know, these things are easy, they can be cheap. And I think that highlights for us that it's just not the case, whether applicable under 102.3B or not. And then Director Yount.
Director Yount.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, for the story. And you kind of took my thunder there, because, you know, there's been some talk, and I've heard some people ask, well, why don't they just go to water court? And that there is uncertainty. You just showed the uncertainty with water court.
Yeah.
And to, you know, in the 102.3B, I know to me, these are totally like two different issues. So one is making people go to water court, to get their water rights affirmed or whatever, where there is uncertainty. And then the other one is the administration of the river. So there's kind of two different things here. And so, you know, if I was just to read the plain language of 1023B, I would say, if I was a rancher in your shoes, I would say, I don't have to go to water court. It says I have a pre-existing use. Everybody knows I water my cattle so it's, to me, being a rancher, I would say, I understand why you didn't concern yourself with this at all. And so what's difficult is that through some discussions and some legal trying to understand the intent of the legislation, that's where the things are rubbing together. The way I see it is the intent. And you know, if you read it plainly, I'd say no. And then there's this intent. What did they really intend? And I think, you know, Kevin, maybe you want to weigh in on the state engineer has come up with, after looking at the intent, which he does on a lot of other issues, he looks at the intent of legislation. He looks at the intent and says, well, I really think they should. But then there's the hard part of, when should they? Should they do it right away? I don't see how you would know to do that right away during the in-stream flow. You have a stock watering use, so that's a difficult thing. So it's kind of a separate thing. So the state engineer is coming in and saying, you know, we need to administrate this water right. Even if the CWCB's in-stream flow says, we understand that we're subject to pre-existing uses, which I think there's no question we are. How do we know? You got to put yourselves in the CWCB shoes too. So they want to know, what is the extent of these water rights? What are we being subject to? And that becomes a difficulty. So we just there's part of us that needs to kind of clarify at least how much we're subject to. And so I think that, you know, the staff is trying to come up with something, and I think we can work out something, but we have administrative directive that says, hey, you need to somehow quantify the water, and you have to confirm it, is what I'm hearing anyway. So all of these things are playing together, and I think we can come up with something, but I agree with you. I would never have come in, and I probably wouldn't want to go and try to get a water right unless I'm concerned that there's some other water rights that will come in later that you may be subject to that you want to quantify. And I commend you for trying to quantify them, and I'm sorry that you had to go through all that.
Yeah, and I think that's why we did it, is because we were afraid if we didn't do it, you know, eventually it might shoot us in the foot. And so, and basically we shot ourselves our own foot when we did it. And as far as how large this issue is, I think maybe statewide there is quite a bit of issue. District 6 is maybe a little more unique because that issue is a hot topic right now. So yeah, you're going to have it elsewhere also. And as far as how do you know, I don't. So I can see somebody maybe abusing this right. I really do. But like I said, we're not farmers. I mean, our intent of use was livestock. And so it'd have to be a case-by-case basis, I would assume. But, and you guys got a heck of a task ahead of you. So I commend you for tackling it. But yeah, it's something we need to look at.
Right, and it's not necessarily even a CWCB issue. We have a water right, but it's an administrative issue that we're trying to deal with, and if we can help out somehow, we're trying to figure out a way to do that.
Yes.
You know, so that's just what it seems like. Is it's a difficult thing that we're trying to figure out, and if we don't know, even if it was the entire ditch that you diverted historically, that wasn't part of, like Jason had mentioned, you know, that wasn't part of the in-stream flow when we measured it because you were taking the water. That makes sense. So even if it's the whole ditch, but we still need to know which ditch, how much they historically took and things like that. I mean, so that we can administrate this water right in there.
Well, and that's just it. You know, the Maybelle Irrigation District has got some really good records, and we still lost that battle. They used our own records against us, is what they did. So, you know, they used our historical values against us, but then they wouldn't let us use our historical values for what we wanted. So, I mean, it's a mess.
Right. The only other thing is maybe, you know, after you guys are done, maybe we can hear from Jen or Linda about just what the chances are of this blowing up in court if we actually go through something like this. I mean, it's hard to predict, but are we going to get things like that hit us? And so that's another question that just popped into my head. So,
Any others?
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, thank you.
Director Brown?
I guess, Mike, before you leave, you all did a really nice job of walking us through the history of this, and I really appreciate that. And I think we've also made it a very complicated issue. I think we've done our best to clarify that, you know, today we're talking about 102.3B, and if there is a way for this board, whose mission is to conserve, develop, protect, and manage Colorado's water for present and future generations, which I think fits nicely into the situation that you've brought before us, that is, you know, something we would, in a policy way, like to help with if we, or I can't speak for the board, I would like to help you with that. But those two things aside, from Cattleman's perspective, the proposal that they talked about a little earlier and that you all received, do you think that is a way that at least can show that CWCB is willing to work with folks on this 102.3B issue if we do move forward on that direction?
Absolutely, I do. Yes, I think it's something that, you know, it shows that maybe you guys are thinking about it. And I think that's what we're looking for.
Thank you.
Thank you again for coming.
Yep.
Andy?
Hi, Andy Mueller, the General Manager at the Colorado River District. Before I start, I just wanted to mention Terry Fankhauser is here on behalf of Cattlemen's as well, and if there are questions for Terry, I know he'd be happy to answer them. I just wanted to touch on a couple things, and I think Director Jan really hit it. The statute is actually clear and plain on its face. It talks about the in-stream flow being subject to water prior appropriations, whether or not previously confirmed by court order or decree. And what we heard from the CWCB staff earlier is that there was a deeper dive into the legislative history where it was determined that the intent was different. Well, this board, and at least in public session, has never seen any legislative intent discussed. You've seen the legislative intent discussed through our counsel, Jason Turner. But prior to that deep dive, the plain language of the statute is what governs. And actually, it's what governs anyway. If we were or are forced to bring this to a court, the court looks at the plain language of the statute. If it's ambiguous, then the court would go into the legislative history. So I think that previously, you know, State Engineer Ryan was kind enough to come to our board, and he did a great job explaining his position, extremely helpful, and we really appreciate that. I think that in our mind, and I think in the mind of State Engineer Ryan, as I think I understood him to say at our meeting, and several of the division engineers that I've talked to, the language is really simple and clean, and they've been doing that for a long, long time in many of our divisions in the state. Yes, we do have the right, when the CWCB files a water court case as water users, to come in to a case and say, hey, I've got a pre-existing undecreed use. And probably the best practice, speaking as an attorney, is to also file your water right application and get it recognized in the CWCB case and then get your own decree. And I can tell you, as a lawyer who practiced for 23 years, primarily in Division 4, I did that several times on CWCB in-stream flows. But I had two different types of clients down in Uray and San Miguel County. I had people who had millions and billions of dollars, literally, and they had their ranches, large ranches. When I talked to their general counsel back in New York or California, and I said, hey, we have a problem. This in-stream flow is showing up on the notice. You have this undecreed use that I'm aware of. We probably ought to get in that case and clean this up. No problem, do it. Hang up the phone. Got in there, worked with your staff, worked with the Attorney General's office, and got very good results from that. Usually at a cost of, and usually I had to hire an engineer, do some engineering analysis, some historical analysis, somewhere between 10 and 20 grand for those episodes. The coastal wealth had no problem writing the checks. I would also see that same thing for my multi-generational ranching clients. I would call them up, usually at about 8 o'clock at night, because I knew that's when they would actually be home. And that probably dates my law practice, because that was pre-cell phone. And I would call them up and I'd say, hey, we got this problem, and by the way, it's going to cost some money, and I probably need an engineer, and this is what the statute says. It says whether or not previously confirmed by court order or decree. And without an exception, my multi-generational ranching client said, I can't afford that. I said, I can cut my fees, I can do it for half. No, Andy, if the statute says that, I'm protected. So those people didn't enter into those cases because they relied on the plain meaning of the language. So that's not a CWCB issue, that's a Division of Water Resources issue. That's a DNR issue, frankly. And it is putting, unfortunately, many of our multi-generational ranchers at odds with the in-stream flow program. It is a bad outcome for the in-stream flow program. It is a bad outcome for our people who have relied on the statute. So to hear your staff say that they will not support a legislative change that clarifies this and provides an avenue for this through DWR, to hear them say that they won't support it is really, really hard for people like me who have worked with those multi-generational families. I would ask, at a bare minimum, that you direct your staff not to interfere with or lobby against or say it's a bad idea at the state legislature or to our legislators, because we are going to have to go forward with that if DWR and DNR can't find it within themselves to enforce the plain meaning of the statute. And I understand, and I really do respect State Engineer Ryan. He is extremely professional. We just happen to disagree on this very particular point. It is not his intent. He's not doing this to hurt these folks. But it is an issue, and it's one that we have a duty at the River District, and Cattlemen's has a duty to its constituents to clean up. Southwestern has a duty. And we've heard already from Division 4 people, from Division 5 people who have these same situations, who are really worried about this happening. So my concern is that we collectively in the water policy world need to fix this problem. We're open to solutions, but forcing water users into a determination of a water right case is not it. Because you bring those people into a water right case, opposers get to show up. Mike's case, yes, it wasn't an in-stream flow case, but he was speaking today because that's the kind of opposer who can show up. It could be Mount Warner, it could be another one of our water users on a different sector of water use who's concerned. We're going to open those water users up to all sorts of challenges. You can't limit that determination of water right the way that your staff is suggesting. It is going to broaden the attack on those people's water rights. It's going to potentially subject them to all sorts of challenges in terms of historic use, of consumptive use, of you name it, and it isn't doing any of us in this room a favor. And so we're open to suggestions, and I've talked with Director Mitchell quite a bit about this. We have no desire to stir the pot up at the legislature. Your staff mentioned that has unintended consequences when you go to the legislature on in-stream flow issues. We agree. We don't think that's a perfect solution. But if you have a better one that will actually fix this, other than Division of Water Resources changing, going back to their interpretation, going back to the guidelines that we were in the process of negotiating about, that both of our staffs have talked about here today, we would very much appreciate that kind of solution. But I have to tell you, in all fairness, we don't feel like we have much choice but to go to the legislature at this time. And it's been lingering now for over 5 years as we've worked with this, and it's time to clean this up, one way or the other. So help us out is what we're asking. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any questions or comments? Director Trick.
Thanks, Andy. I have a question about the proposal in the paper regarding the legislation. So is there an interpretation of that where anointing the state engineer's office with that administrative power is actually infringing on the water court's adjudicatory purview, for lack of a better phrase?
I don't believe so, because I believe that the statute actually talks about decreed or undecreed uses. So the discussion has been that the state engineer doesn't feel they have the statutory authority to administer those rights because they can't define what they are. So this statutory change actually allows them to define what they are. They do that frequently in a consultation role with water courts right now. And I think that this would allow them to make that determination, but allow any water user who was in that process to appeal it into court if they felt they were aggrieved by the administrative process. So it's a prejudicial, if you will, determination, and if everybody's happy, they walk away. I've heard that our proposal doesn't have notice or has notice concerns about other water users in the system. We'd certainly be willing to put some language, whether it's in the statute or under the regulations that DWR would have to come up with, to make sure that notice, like interim water supply filing gets noticed. There are lots of ways to accomplish that. So I think there are ways that we can work together to solve this problem and make sure that the engineer is not supplanting the court, but is actually carrying out the intent of that compromise that was in the statute.
Okay, thank you for addressing that.
Okay.
Director Hawkins.
Thanks, Andy. I have one question, but two contexts.
Sure.
What legal standard in either the administrative process or under the legislation would be used by the state engineer to make this determination?
Sure. My thought would be the standard that's used in any water court case, preponderance of the evidence.
So you would be asking in the administrative process, you're asking the state engineer to use a preponderance of the evidence process, but with no water court review.
Right.
Is that done anywhere else in Colorado?
I'd have to defer to our current water legal counsel, but not that I'm aware of. So I would just point out that this statute, this particular language in the statute that has this decreed or undecreed language, doesn't appear anywhere else in our statutory scheme either. So this is a unique situation, Director Hawkins, and I acknowledge that.
Director Trick.
Kind of a follow-up to that, I guess, and maybe also Mr. Turner could field this question too. I guess under a reading of 1023B, I agree with you that the facial part of that is probably not ambiguous. However, the quantification question of when the pre-existing use needs to be confirmed or notified or noticed to the CWCB, that's what I'm having issues with. And so under your reading of that, are you saying that the legislature intended that in perpetuity, forever and ever, a pre-existing use could come back at any time and make a claim? In other words, was there no cutoff date intended there, being, I guess, what the sentence that was deleted saying the proper time to come would be at the time the CWCB files their water right. That was deleted for whatever reason. So you're saying that they fully intended that it would just go on in perpetuity, no matter how many years later these claims could come back into an in-stream flow decree?
Director Trick, I would agree with you that the absence of an end date or a deadline is exactly that it could go on in perpetuity. I think the administrative solution that we've suggested would allow the resolution of those. And I would say this, having dealt with a number of adverse possession cases and things like you may have dealt with in both, frankly, real property and water, as things go further out from the original date of a creation of a situation like this, the evidence gets fuzzier and fuzzier, so it gets harder and harder to establish that. It would it does create some issues, but there being no date in that statute, then yeah, I would say that there was never an intent to cut them off at a certain date. I think you're right, as Mr. Turner pointed out, the statute suggested it would be that in-stream flow filing, the original introduced legislation, which was removed in order to get the legislation passed.
I guess I'm struggling with that conceptually because it seems to be completely opposite of the normal water court filing system and the normal court system, right? Where you're noticed by the resume. If you don't participate, you're still bound by that decree and ruling, even if you didn't participate, and the matter becomes closed unless, you know, there's an injury question or something that comes back later. So I'm struggling with that intent-wise, if that's their interpretation, because it seems to be kind of opposite to how we normally do things.
Director Trick, I would agree with you, and that is the unique nature of this statute, and that's what makes an in-stream flow, frankly, have a different characteristic than any other water right in the state of Colorado, and it is this pre-existing undecreed use issue that creates that distinction, and it is hard to grapple with. That's why we're all here grappling with it, but it is exactly that. It was a compromise to make sure, and as Governor Lamb's signing statement said, to hopes that people would stop attacking and trying to repeal the in-stream flow program. So yes, it is an unusual legal animal.
And then I guess on the practical side, I mean, regardless of what they intended in 81, we still have the problem of how does the board get information about these uses, where they need to get them on the stream reaches that they may be appropriating on, and take that information into account. So it's just a practicality problem.
Yeah. Well, I would say that if it's a pre-existing use that they're filing on, or where they're filing in all of these cases that we are aware of, where there are pre-existing non-decreed uses, I think as Mr. Turner indicated, when the staff went out to measure the flow in the river and determine the amount available for appropriation for the in-stream flow, this water wasn't in the channel. So they're not, the in-stream flow is not being diminished by this amount. And in terms of how you identify them, they come up. They come up with the division engineer when a call is placed, right? The division engineer goes and says, well, there's a call on the river, who's diverting? And that's exactly what happened with Division Engineer Light in the Elk River. The call went on in 2012, and she went up the river with her water commissioner and found people diverting for stock water uses and said, yeah, I don't see a decree, right? At that point in time, if that were found, and we had a process, an administrative process set up, the CWCB or the water user could initiate that process, get that quantified and determined. If they're not happy with the administrative outcome, they could then appeal it into water court and have it determined. And that's really the what I think we're all looking for is a solution which will help people, but it will show up when the call comes on.
Any additional questions or comments? Director Brown?
I have some additional comments, but I wonder if Southwestern's going to speak. I can hold off on those. Is that still the plan?
Yes.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sure you weren't going to leave, but please hang around. We may call you back up here. Thank you. Next we have Beth Van Verst and Frank Kugel.
Good afternoon. My name is Beth Van Verst, and I serve as General Counsel for the Southwestern Water Conservation District. As its name suggests, the Southwestern Water Conservation District is based in the southwest corner of the state and encompasses all or parts of 9 counties in that area of the state. I am joined today by Southwest's Executive Director, Frank Kugel. Frank will be providing some additional comments after I'm done. I'd like to begin today by thanking all of you for allowing us the opportunity to share Southwest concerns and our position on this issue. While they weren't able to attend today, I have also been authorized to state that the Dolores Water Conservancy District, which is also located within the southwest corner of the state, shares our concerns, particularly with the state engineer's interpretation of Section 102.3b. I understand that you've already had a really long meeting, and so I'll keep this just to a few key points, and then we're certainly happy to answer any questions. First, Southwest reads Section 102.3b in the very same way that the River District does. We believe the legislative language is clear on its face, and therefore the analysis stops there. We believe that Section 102.3b prevents the CWCB from calling out, or in other words, attempting to curtail or stop diversions by a pre-existing use or exchange that were in existence before a particular water right was appropriated. With regard to the questions surrounding quantification of a pre-existing use, I believe the state engineer already has that authority inherent with his powers to administer water rights within the state as well as waters of the state. Southwest does not believe it is reasonable to read into this statute the requirement that a pre-existing water user go to water court to confirm their water right. If the General Assembly had intended to do that, I think they would have. We believe that a water user may choose to go to water court to confirm their water right, but again, it is not required in order to benefit from the protections under 102.3b. Second, while this issue may have arisen out of a specific set of facts in Division 6 surrounding stockwater use, we believe that the solution needs to go beyond what is currently being proposed by CWCB staff. We believe a statewide solution, if necessary in the form of the legislation proposed by the River District, is both appropriate and prudent for several reasons. One of those reasons is that the state's position has introduced a great deal of uncertainty for both pre-existing uses and exchanges. And it doesn't seem realistic that this situation isn't going to repeat itself elsewhere within the state. This is because the CWCB's and the state engineer's position isn't limited to the specific set of facts that we're dealing with in Division 6. Instead, the state's position now turns on a question of law, and it calls into question the protection that the legislature intended to provide for all water users and exchanges that were developed prior to the appropriation of each in-stream flow right. As you all know, there are in-stream flow rights decreed all over Colorado, and the number of in-stream flow appropriations continues to increase every single year. Over the course of the in-stream flow program, the CWCB has already appropriated in-stream flow rights covering at least 9,600 miles of streams within Colorado. Many of these in-stream flow rights have the potential to impact a number of junior water users and possibly now, under the state's interpretation, undecreed pre-existing uses and exchanges. I think it's important to remember that an in-stream flow call doesn't just impact the water users within those 9,700 miles of stream segments. Instead, an in-stream flow right can also extend upstream for potentially miles upon miles, which affects many additional users. This is a big deal in southwestern Colorado, particularly on the low-end in-stream flow appropriations that have occurred within our basin, like the one adjudicated on the Dolores River for up to 900 CFS at certain times of the year. That in-stream flow reach terminates very close to the Colorado-Utah border. It extends up the Dolores River about 33 miles, but any sort of call could extend much, much farther up the Dolores River, up the San Miguel River, and all of those tributaries. Southwest also believes it is necessary to broadly address Section 1023B now, because while it is our understanding that everybody involved in this issue in Division 6 has been working very hard and in good faith towards a resolution, these types of fact and site-specific situations take a long time to develop, and they take a long time to get to the finish line. That much is absolutely clear today. That type of solution isn't going to help a pre-existing water user that suddenly finds themselves in a situation where the CWCB places a call on a water on some other creek, on some other river, some other stream elsewhere within the state. In order to resolve this issue, the solution needs to extend beyond the specific geographic area, beyond the specific type of use, and recognize that pre-existing uses and exchanges may be recognized and confirmed through the state engineer's office so that they are entitled to this statutory protection. In sum, Southwest agrees with the position of the River District. We believe the legislation is clear on its face and that pre-existing uses and exchanges do not need to be confirmed by the Water Court. To the extent the state engineer's office continues to disagree with this position, we do support clarifying this through legislation. With regard to the precise language of that legislation, Southwest does support the language that's being proposed by the River District. We are certainly open to considering further modifications. It seems reasonable to go ahead and suggest that a water user could choose to go to water court if they want to, but they aren't required to do so. I also certainly think it seems reasonable to put in additional provisions to provide notice to other water users. So thank you again for your consideration of Southwest comments. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but Frank is also here to provide some comments as well.
Thank you, Beth. Director Hawkins?
Thanks, Beth. I appreciate you coming up here today. I want to make sure I understand a portion of your comments, so I want to ask a couple of questions. You talked about the in-stream flow program and in-stream flow rights having the potential to affect junior water users, and you talked specifically about the Dolores River. I'm struggling a little bit with that because it seems like that's priority administration and an issue with the CWCB calling an in-stream flow right. That seems to be a different issue than the 1023B issue that we're speaking about today. So did I misunderstand?
No, I agree with you that that is a different issue. My point was that the in-stream flow right can affect junior water users because it can place a call against them, and that we're concerned about there being even additional impacts by the potential curtailment of upstream pre-existing uses and exchanges.
Okay, I think I understand.
Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Director Trick?
This might be putting you on the spot a little bit, but do you have any non-legislative solutions to suggest for us?
I personally believe, and I think Southwest would support me on this, that I believe the state engineer already has this authority inherent within Section 1023B as the language currently exists today. I don't think that there is necessarily a legislative fix necessary unless the state engineer continues to disagree with the interpretation of that statute. In terms of, potential additional actions that could provide you guys with some of the information that you asked about, quantifying the pre-existing uses, we certainly believe that it would be appropriate for Kevin, if he chooses to exercise his authority, to go forward with either, guidelines or rules or any sort of policy to be able to provide a mechanism for quantifying some pre-existing uses if a water user chooses to come in to do that.
Okay, I'm just gonna follow up one more
Okay.
thing on that. I mean, that kind of addresses Kevin's office, his side of things. I guess I'm looking more for a suggestion on the CWCB's side as far as a non-legislative action that we, solution that we could pursue. Not having to do with Kevin's office because we don't have the authority to tell his office what to do.
Right, and I'm struggling on that a little bit because, quite frankly, I view 1023B as primarily an administrative issue. that it's a water rights issue to be dealt with through the state engineer's office. 1023B certainly affects the administration of an in-stream flow right and who you can or cannot call out. But I don't really view there as being a specific need from the CWCB on some of these items. I think Kevin already has the authority. To the extent he doesn't, we would certainly appreciate your support in trying to clarify that. But I don't think that the CWCB necessarily needs to do anything. Frank can correct me on that if I'm wrong.
Director Brown.
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, the proposal that CWCB staff has put forward, do you think in your, from the conversations you've had in the Southwestern District that that's useful to your water users, or do you think that it runs at an opposite purpose?
I don't think that it runs at an opposite purpose. I think it's a great idea, and we certainly support people trying to come up with various options to try to address this issue. I think the CWCB staff's proposal provides one possible solution. I do have some questions about whether or not the CWCB actually has the authority to shepherd a water court application on behalf of another water user. So that's just a question. I haven't looked into it enough to really develop an opinion on it. But I think what's most important to the Southwest District is that it continues, I guess it's not clear anymore, but would be clear that it's a water user's choice to go into water court. It's great if the CWCB would help them along through that process, but that they're not required to do so.
Director Trick.
Just to put a pin in my earlier question, I would invite Andy or Mr. Turner to address that as well, as far as suggestions for the board as to actions that, you know, we could take efforts to find a solution that is non-legislative. So whether now or after the other comments are made.
This is Jason Turner with the Colorado River District. I think, as Linda expressed earlier, when we were working on that administrative solution, CWCB staff was going to be involved in that along with the state engineer's office. So with regards to the questions that were asked earlier, how would the CWCB know about the extent of these? They would be informed by the state engineer's office and be able to weigh in on those issues. State engineer's office would make the ultimate determination, and that's why we also, in our legislative solution, provided that any party who felt aggrieved, including the CWCB, could appeal that. But if we were going to go the purely administrative route that we were working on prior, it was contemplated when we were having those discussions and actually drafting language that the CWCB would be involved.
And I guess, is that the CWCB making a new policy? Is that a rulemaking? Is that just a staff procedure? What does that look like in your
I couldn't tell you how you want to handle your business, but you know, I mean, we were meeting with your staff. They were part of these discussions, and it was recognized in whatever guideline Kevin was going to put out to his water commissioners that the CWCB staff would be notified and given an opportunity to weigh in on these issues.
Okay.
Frank.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Frank Kugel. I'm the Executive Director of the Southwestern Water Conservation District for all of 2.5 months. Glad to be here. Prior to my being at Southwestern, I was the General Manager of the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District, and prior to that I was Division Engineer in Water Division 4. In the Gunnison Basin, especially the Upper Gunnison Basin, there was a great deal of winter stock water use. That was a historic practice. Ranchers across the basin used that, and it was vital to their livelihood to run winter stock water. There is an in-stream flow call that happens most years in the Upper Gunnison, and there have been historic irrigation or winter stock water releases, as well as other non-decreed uses, such as filling stock ponds and the like. And so that practice is ongoing, and I guess as division engineer, I would have welcomed a clear direction and I think it's important that there is a clear direction across the state for how these people can have some certainty on whether their non-decreed uses will continue to be allowed. And so I think it's important, the appropriate avenue is for State Engineer Ryan to have that authority to come to a decision that addresses those historic practices and allows those to continue. I agree with others that spoke before me that the avenue of going to water court is fraught with peril. I think there's a lot of unintended consequences that could happen by that occurring. So I think just a change in the direction of administration would go a great deal towards solving this problem. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Thank you, Frank. Director Schwartz.
Thank you. Thanks, Frank, for being here. You've spent a long time with us last 2 days. So I guess I need to understand, and maybe some clarification, present uses or exchanges. I guess I'm wondering what else is in this category. I thought we were talking about direct flow, stock watering during the winter months, and then you mentioned ponds. And what else is out there? I mean, I think before us is this sort of narrow question of the in-stream flows and the ability to document these uses or exchanges. So what other issues are you seeing are within that category of present uses or exchanges?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Director Schwartz. There are other uses, non-decreed uses that occur historically, and I think this is a great opportunity to address all of those, not just winter stock water, but to have a broader solution. Other non-decreed uses that occur historically include fall pasture, which may or may not be recognized by the State Engineer's Office as growing a crop. Others will say that it is important for ranchers to build up the sub for subsequent crops and starting in the spring, that they can get their water across the pasture more quickly in the spring if the groundwater level is raised higher during the fall previously. So, and it's been documented by multiple ranchers that that is an effective practice that provides beneficial use. So I think that's another example of non-decreed use that could be addressed by this policy, any policy or change in direction at this time.
And you feel all those would impact an in-stream flow application? Is that what you're saying?
I would say that
all of which needs to be documented and provided in a time of an in-stream flow application?
Yeah, those would be historic conditions that would be in place prior to any in-stream flow filing.
Thanks.
Frank, do you have any ideas?
I guess my thought is that, again, as a division engineer, I appreciated broad discretion in administering my basin and had 28 water commissioners working for me in executing my direction. But there are some times where I think it's important to have clear direction statewide, and I think that's where a state engineer, just a written statement to the division engineers from the state engineer would be sufficient in allowing these historic practices to continue without going to water court.
Thank you. Director Schwartz.
Thank you. And so, just sort of exploring this, and you and I obviously have worked together in the Upper Gunnison, but in terms of this being a water right that uniquely the CWCB holds and basically administers and protects for the interests of the state, it's basically constitutes 9% of all of the rivers and streams in the state of Colorado, so it's not an overwhelming number of the over 100,000 miles of rivers and streams. And so if you had a water right that you were responsible for and it had these open-ended issues, a whole spectrum of uses, you didn't have a clarification on timing, deadlines, a confirmation of uses. I mean, I think that looking at this from the perspective of water right holder, I'm really challenged at how open-ended this proposal is, and it's kind of the unintended consequences, or as we always said in the legislature. How broad is this? How do we narrow this to just the conversation we're having, because there are so many other issues that may be needed to be addressed in other divisions at other times, but in terms of just the role of the CWCB than what's before us. I guess my inclination is to limit the conversation to the issue that's specifically before us in Division 6 when it comes to direct flow stock watering use. What's your perspective on other water rights that are being administered in other basins?
I do think that this is part of a broader issue that is appropriate to be addressed at this time. That would be my preference and recommendation.
Thank you.
Director Brown?
Thank you, Frank. I appreciate it. I think I would just like to put Amy on the spot for a moment if she would explain to the board and the audience again what the DNR procedure is for supporting or opposing legislation, and then I have a comment after she does that.
Sure. Thanks, Director Brown. And I just want to thank everyone for coming here today. And just a note on process for the department on legislative issues and on taking positions on any legislative proposals. So the governor's office lays out a process for departments to request to take a position on a bill during the legislative session. This doesn't occur when there's just a legislative concept on the table and only occurs when there's an introduced bill. This certainly doesn't preclude discussion on a legislative concept and, of course, continuing to participate in any sort of solutions that would be a non-legislative course. But when it comes to taking up positions, typically that's done on a department basis, and we're required to follow a process that's governed by the governor's office.
Thank you. And I've been shuffling around this in my mind of what is appropriate going forward, and I know that no action is required today. So I would like to put forward direction to staff that they continue to explore the solution that they brought for us on a statewide basis. And it's my understanding that that process would be that the water user would work with CWCB staff, and when they felt like they came to a place where they would be going forward to water court, that would be brought before the board. And I know I'm going out a little bit on a limb here, but I feel that this is a solution that we've gone back and forth enough about, and I think it's very clear at this point that there is only so much in CWCB's purview. And so I'd like to be able to offer a solution while maybe the larger issue gets worked out. And I guess that's in the, I think, probably 100+ hours that I've had to think about that. That's the only one that I can come up with right now. And I don't feel like I have the authority to say that it's just in Division 6. So I appreciate Frank's comments. And I think it gives us an opportunity to make those decisions when staff comes forward with a proposal to go to water court. So I just like to hear what other people think about that direction.
Thank you, Director Brown. Director Yon?
Yeah. So I was just wondering what to hear from Director Ryan, because, you know, really this is an administrative issue, and so this idea of legislation, or what would you like to see? I mean, we're all trying to figure this out, and really you're the one that holds the cards for us, and you're doing your job the way you're supposed to do. But what would you prefer? I mean, you heard one of your former division engineers say it's nice to have some direction on this kind of thing and be free to do these kind of administrative things. So is a piece of legislation a better thing, or is trying to go through water court every time that we have one of these and some kind of mechanism there? So I'll let you talk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks. And I've stayed intentionally pretty silent today because I believe that these folks had the floor. And I would just like to question, Madam Chair, are there other people that intend to speak today?
That's all the public comment.
Okay. Then that's great timing, and I can make a few comments. I have stayed silent, as I said, to let these people have the floor. It's their day to speak. But it's probably good timing, and in fairness, I will say that the question has been, will I change my interpretation. And I would need to be convinced on a couple legal questions that I was not convinced on today. So that's where we are. We all understand that's where we are. On the question of legislation, Amy has said it well. It's very difficult for us to really commit to that in DNR at this point in the game. But I've seen it from the River District before, and we got to see it again. I don't have all the same concerns that the CWCB staff has regarding the legislation. That's for them to represent. That makes sense. I'm in a different place than they are. And I don't have strong concerns about the administrability of that. I would be willing to, I am willing to continue to talk about this legislative solution and how that language really takes the, as I've said, gives me something to hang my hat on when I have this concern about legislative intent right now. So we can do that. I'm willing to do that, but I do understand that the CWCB staff has their concerns, and ultimately with that backdrop of CWCB and the state engineer, perhaps DNR would like to be part of that, overseeing that. But I can say I don't have any concerns about the administrability. It seems to solve the problem for the state engineer.
Okay. No, thanks, because that's kind of what I was wondering. It just seems like this is, it seems like we'd be remiss if we're just going to focus on this one little thing and we just go with blinders on saying, hey, we're gonna try to fix this in Division 6, and then we have all these other areas that maybe this could come up, and we're going to revisit this again and again and again. So if there is something, whether it's something we do or something that we can do for you, I would like to see it as a bigger picture. Let's fix this issue if we can.
And if I could add one condition to what I just said, I do understand the staff's concerns and perhaps the board's concerns that there is a burden here under this legislation to make these determinations. I've maintained it's not a determination of a water right, but something needs to be determined, the extent of the use, the date at which it started. But I maintain, and maybe somebody can tell me otherwise, I maintain that burden lies on all of us, whether this is done through water court confirmation or through an administrative process. We still need to make those same determinations of the extent of the use, the original date of the use, et cetera. So I just wanted that to be out there for the record.
Director Brody.
I too want to thank everyone for your thoughtful testimony today, and also to the River District for putting forth a constructive proposal as a way forward. I'm convinced at the moment that there is a problem, and that it's a problem of this unique and quirky statute that we're all trying to carry out effectively. The statutory language seems to make clear that the burden should not be on those historical users to have to come to court. Yet at the same time, absent that process, we've got this dilemma of trying to document, measure what those historic uses are for everybody's benefit and for the benefit of effective administration. So I would encourage staff to engage, if possible, and try to work to fix what is effectively a dilemma created in the statute. I'm not seeing another complete solution, even if we could potentially address the particular issue in front of us today. And so I'm hopeful that the parties can come together, and if the River District's proposal is not the perfect proposal, that we can have a thoughtful exchange of ideas and ideally come up with something that we can all stand behind. But again, I do want to thank the River District for coming forward with a constructive path forward.
Director Schwartz.
Thank you. I guess I would just ask the district, when you look at, I don't know if Andy wants to talk, or anyone, I don't put anyone on the spot, but when you look at the scope, the potential scope, I mean, and where this administration may take place and areas where it wouldn't necessarily take place, and the ability to work collaboratively on a solution, I guess we're putting our trust in our team to come together and find, but you can see that this can be quite narrow and surgically addressed, or it could be quite broad, and I think it would be appropriate to have some opportunity to collaborate on what the issues are, work with Division of Water Resources as well as Department of Natural Resources, because I think it's important to the state, and I don't think that the in-stream flow program should be take the fall on this, because there are a lot of questions on the table.
Linda, Jen, do you have anything to contribute? Okay, Andy, it looks like you're springing out of your chair.
I'm sorry. If I could just, I think Director Schwartz asked me to respond, so I apologize. I would say that we're more than happy to collaborate. We have been for at least 5 years now with Engineer Ryan's office and with the CWCB staff and DNR, and we're happy to work forward as we go forward. I do think, and I think, by the way, Engineer Ryan was very clear at our board meeting again today. He believes that there are some real questions about the intent and really wants that cleaned up. Well, he didn't say this, but I believe what I'm hearing is that maybe he wants it cleaned up by the legislature. And I think we can do that, and I think we can do that if we do that in a collaborative way with a statute with language that we can agree on. I think we can avoid the polarization that this type of legislative effort sometimes causes. And so I think from us, I want you to hear, the entire board here, that we are interested in collaborating and cooperating and keeping it in a very cooperative manner so that we can create something that we can all work with. So,
Well, just a quick response, I think Director George would agree. Working these issues out prior to going under the Gold Dome is far more preferable. And having done a lot of department bills, 8 years of project bills, I mean, this ironing out some of these differences prior to, threatening legislation, no, collaboratively working on looking at the broader picture, but we don't want to do it really at the cost of what is a very, very valuable, critical program of in-stream flows and the misconceptions as to what the potential problems might be.
and we agree completely. And I would just say, I mean, we provided the initial draft of this statute legislative fix back in March. And we're more than happy to continue to collaborate, but we do need some input from DNR and others to know what language they would like to get in there and how we could make that work. I think that we, for instance, when this staff proposal became available to us recently, we actually modified a sentence of that proposed statutory language to make sure that if that proposal from the staff were to proceed, that it is an option for those who want to take advantage of it through water court, because we don't want to preclude any solutions out there if water users of the CWCB see them as the right ones, but we want to make sure that there is a solution that people can rely on. And so we are willing to collaborate on these things. Thank you.
Andy, I wonder if within that collaborative vein, I'd be interested in hearing what your thoughts would be on potentially working through Water Congress. It seems like often something comes up and it's pretty sticky, and then we take some time and there's a Water Congress committee, and all of a sudden we come up with something really shiny and effective that everybody can agree on. And wonder if you, as the proponent, would be willing to initiate that right off the bat.
I think we could certainly do that. I'd love to honestly get DNR and the CWCB staff to weigh in on the particulars of the bill before it even gets into the State Affairs Committee, because I think if we could come together to Water Congress even and say, here's what we're thinking and here's why, I think we have a much better chance of success with that. So,
any additional thoughts? Okay, Linda?
Linda Bassi, Stream and Lake Protection Section. There are many things we could rebut, but we don't want to take the time to do that. But I did want to clarify that our water court proposal is not to go to water court on behalf of a water user. It's to go to water court to get the relationship between the in-stream flow right and undecreed uses confirmed. So that's one thing. The second thing is that what Andy Mueller just said about the added language, I didn't read it, and I hope it wasn't intended just to address that. This proposal that we've brought, it would also be to address our current practices of including these uses in-stream flow decrees and working in the context of other users' water court applications to recognize those 1023B uses.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure. I'm up here on behalf of staff and as staff to just request a little more clarity on what the board is asking us to do, particularly Director Brody. I wasn't sure exactly what you were asking us to do. And so I will sit down. I just wanted to ask for a little more clarity. Thank you.
So I was offering my opinion and not necessarily any direction on behalf of the board as a whole, but my request was simply that if possible, the staff consider working collaboratively with River District and other stakeholders. I think the suggestion of perhaps working through Water Congress is a good one and worth consideration.
Director Brown?
Perhaps these can run parallelly, and I guess I think we know that staff's proposal needs a little bit more fleshing out to make sure that it would work. I would like to move forward with that, and I don't want to speak on behalf of the board, so I've been trying to test whether my direction is in line with yours. But since I'm not getting that, I'm wondering, are there any more questions about this proposal, or is it time for me to make a motion to that regard, that we go forward knowing that Linda's comments would be that she would bring back the case number prior to, and ask for board authorization prior to going through that water court action? And this may be premature, but I think this has been going on for a very long time, so I don't know how much more, maybe there's collaboration on language that can end up being beneficial for legislation, but as far as a solution to some of the specific issues we've heard, I don't want to not offer that right now.
Director Schwartz?
Thank you, and Director Brown, I'm just challenged by the moving to a statewide application. I mean, again, there's precedents here, and we do have an issue before us in Division 6 for this specific issue, and we've just heard that this interpretation expands a lot of applications in different parts of the state. I guess I'm not ready to commit to a statewide interpretation of this policy and making an interpretation that it's inherent in the language that it is not a water court confirmation. So I'm not ready personally to agree that. I think there still remains the opportunity to work together with the state engineer's office and the department and the River District and our staff to see where some middle ground might be. And we have time.
Director George, you've been silent, but you have quite a bit of experience with DNR, with this board, and you've been a lifelong resident of the Colorado River Basin. I wonder if you have any thoughts you would be willing to add to the conversation.
So, I stayed quiet on purpose, and the purpose was that this board was really being asked to make a pretty serious decision. And as a non-voting member, I think there are several of us who are non-voting members, take our seats here very seriously, and we regard our reason for being here to assure that we're bringing before you on a regular basis the work that we do and that brings us to the seat, and that it's not a general freedom to talk at will, as it is when you have a vote and you're an actual board member. And so it's particularly hard to not help when there is an issue like this. So instead, what I like to do is listen, and if the discussion is lacking somewhere, then figure out a way to communicate that. This discussion was excellent. It's been going on for at least 25 years that I know of. And so many efforts were tried at legislature in the past years. Legislature struggles just like this board does when there are competing interests and no agreement by the competing interests. So this kind of a conversation is very good. The work that's been done by the several staffs is very good. I think the legal interpretations that we have heard about and talked about are correct, that they do not provide the result that makes all of us feel secure. Now, you can, in my opinion, resolve this very easily, but not so legally easily. And so it's important to remember what our role is here. And in my mind, this establishes a good example of what you should do when government is caught in a cultural shift. That's what this issue is, purely and simply. That for 140 years, I think I counted with the ranchers, cattlemen. In my case, this problem started in 1886. When Alfred George settled on West Rifle instead of East Rifle, because he came in August, and East Rifle was still running, West Rifle was not. But somehow he figured out how to build ponds and water his stock. I don't think to this day we have a water right on that stock water because of the culture. You didn't need it, you didn't understand it, and you just did it. And in areas that we've talked about today that have not historically been water short and have not been historically administered tightly, people who lived on the land, worked on the land, and didn't worry too much about going to town very often or going to court ever. And so that's the cultural shift that has caused the problem. And so the solution today would be to let them continue their conduct. And in my opinion, you already have the law that says you can do it. We've talked about it all day. And that's where I would settle in the cultural trap that we're in. I would say it's our purpose here as government to do anything we can to help the citizens who come to us. And in this case, that would be to leave them alone. Now, the one thing I would always ask is that the ranchers come with the proof, because who knows better what the records are. And I think, state engineer has it correct. No matter how you resolve this, you have to have the facts so that you know what water you're talking about and when. So that's a solution. It's not satisfying because it doesn't meet the ultimate test of the law. But it would help in the relationships. It would help in the recognition, the positive recognition by ranchers of why the in-stream flow program is important. By not resolving it, we leave opportunity for disagreement and for ill will. And this is all just a natural consequence of how an unsolvable problem comes before us. And so the reason you didn't hear anything from me was because I don't have a perfect answer either. But this is how I would have bent the conversation as long as anyone would have listened. So thanks for asking.
Director Hawkins.
You're a hard act to follow, Director George. I don't have a solution for the bigger problem that we heard about today, but I listened very carefully, and although Beth expressed a little bit of concern about some of the legal issues in the proposal, I didn't hear anybody say that it was a bad idea for us to try to do a limited or provide a limited solution if we have water users on the Elk River who are interested in confirming their 102.3b rights in water court. So I would put out there that recognizing that we have a larger issue on the table, I would be supportive of continuing to extend that offer, and if there are stock water users on the Elk River in Division 6 that would like to confirm their water rights in court, that we help them do it and see how it goes. And again, I realize we have a specific issue. We may have some specific water users, and I did not hear anything today that anybody thought that it was illegal or a bad idea to go ahead and let water users who want to use the court process to confirm their 102.3b water uses to do that.
Director Yuan.
I'm not opposed to that idea of those that want to do that, but my concern is we just heard from a rancher that probably wouldn't want to go to court, even if CWCB was leading the charge, just because it's still going to be uncertain, and he experienced that. So maybe we can proceed that way, like Director Brown and Director Hawkins have mentioned. But I'm just thinking, as Director Brody said, that maybe looking at it legislatively isn't all bad either, because I think even if the CWCB decides to go forward this way, the River District still thinks that they're going to do something legislatively anyway. So probably. I mean, so I would rather work through that part up front. And as we're talking, maybe something else will come out. I don't know that. But it seems like maybe this should be something that we do in parallel, like you were suggesting.
Director Trick.
Just one more quick comment. I guess we just had a really long discussion about the risks of going to water court, and so if we're going to pursue that avenue, I would want to get some feedback from the AG's office and staff as to the risks presented to the board as part of this solution, as the board process going to the water court for this issue. So I would like to know what those risks are and whether they exist or not in this case. So.
Jen Mealy, Attorney General's Office. Director Trick, you're speaking of the concept staff has proposed, right? What are the risks involved in court in that process?
Yeah, in the proposed process in this instance that we've discussed. Yeah.
It's always a risky process. I think there are risks for potentially the CWCB if somebody's arguing that they actually need to go in and open up their in-stream flow decree because it would actually be a change of water right. I don't think that would happen, but I think that's a slight risk. Director Yan mentioned earlier, he wondered if there is a risk for the water user that they're having their use examined under the microscope, I think there is some risk for the water user. While the user and CWCB might be able to agree on the scope of the use, both amounts, location, and type of use, there may be some opposer who decides to enter the case who doesn't agree. And so it could become a longer process than we had hoped.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jen. Is there any additional discussion, questions, comments on this issue? Thank you sincerely, again, everybody who made the time or took the time to come here and help us learn about this. I think I'm hoping that we're making progress, and I sincerely hope that you will continue to help us with that. So thank you for taking the time. All right, we are on to item 24. I just turned myself off. We are on to item 24, which is the request for authorization to proceed to trial in case number 16 CW 3193.
All right, good afternoon. Kaylee White, CWCB staff. So this is a trial that is set for January 21st, before our next board meeting. We're working hard on settlement with Reclamation and hope to find some resolution actually early December, but in case we don't, we need to seek authorization to proceed, and this is actually a 1023B claim on the Big Thompson by Reclamation for the Unlibus Tunnel diversions of native water. So I don't know if I need to go into it any more than that.
Are there any questions for Kaylee about this item or this case? Why don't you proceed with staff recommendation?
So staff recommendation is that the board authorize staff to proceed to trial to protect its in-stream flow water rights in the event that staff and attorney generals are unable to reach settlement with applicant before trial.
Director Hawkins?
I would move to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 24.
It's been moved by Director Hawkins and seconded by Director Goebel to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 24. Is there any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Kaylee. Okay, we are at agenda item 25, the proposed lease of water for the 15-mile reach.
Sorry, couldn't find the right icon. Linda Bassie with the Stream and Lake Protection Section. This is agenda item 25, proposed lease of water for in-stream flow use in the 15-mile reach of the Colorado River in Water Division 5. This is an informational item with no board action required. So Garfield County has offered to lease a contractual interest in water to the board. It's a potential 5-year lease of water that the county owns in Rudai Reservoir, and it would be leased to the board for use in the 15-mile reach of the Colorado River to preserve and improve the natural environment to a reasonable degree. CWCB would pay for this lease with Species Conservation Trust Fund money because the 15-mile reach supports the habitat of 4 endangered fish species. In 2013, the county purchased 400 acre-feet of Rudai water annually under a repayment contract with the Bureau of Reclamation. This is very similar to the lease that the board had with the Ute Water Conservancy District. It's water under the same decree and the same type of repayment contract. Under that contract, the contract includes M&I use, municipal and industrial, and under the contract, M&I use lists several uses, including use of water by piscatorial users, including delivery of water to supplement stream flow. So the leased water would be used to preserve the natural environment under 2 in-stream flow water rights that the board holds on the 15-mile reach of the Colorado River. The details of those are up on the slide, and they're also in your board memo. Here is a map that shows Root Eye Reservoir, goes down the frying pan to the Colorado River, down to the 15-mile reach, which is the red line on the map. I do have a pointer. But anyway, I think you all know where that is. The natural environment on the 15-mile reach provides critical habitat for the 4 Colorado River endangered fish, bony tail, humpback chub, Colorado pike minnow, and razorback sucker, and it provides both spawning habitat and high-quality habitat for adult fish. CWCB would use this leased water to preserve the natural environment by supplementing its existing in-stream flow water rights. It also could use the leased water to improve the natural environment by providing and helping to meet the gap help meet Fish and Wildlife Service flow recommendations for the endangered fish. And I have a slide that shows what those are coming up. CWCB would coordinate with the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Bureau of Reclamation on the timing and amount of such uses. And I think many of you remember that with our lease of Root Eye Water with the Ute District, we learned that there are issues on the Frying Pan River that we want to make sure that releases don't exceed 300 CFS. That's an amount that maximizes the hydropower benefits from this water, and also don't cause flows in the Frying Pan River below Root Eye to exceed 350 CFS, and that's to address the concerns of anglers who wade in the river. The proposed use is authorized by decree and contract. So the flow recommendations are set forth on this chart, and they differ every year depending on the year type and the month. The chart includes wet, average, dry, and dry year flow amounts. So the flow rate to improve the natural environment could range from 810 to 7,060 CFS. Now, we would not be providing all that water, but that would be, if we had unlimited water to improve, that would be the amount that we could use. That would be used to improve. So this chart shows in 2018, late summer is typically when these flows are needed, and that is also when our in-stream flows are in effect. And this doesn't work. You can see that in September, flows go below the red line. The red line is the in-stream flow water right. The blue line are flows at the Palisade gauge. The black line is the Fish and Wildlife Service flow recommendations for dry years. And so in 2018, you can see that flows went pretty far below both the in-stream flow and the flow recommendations. And I should have more, oh, here they are. Okay. This chart shows what releases from fish pools in Root Eye, Wolford, and I believe Granby. Those are the green additions of water, and then the blue additions of water is total contributions by different cooperators on water, including leased water that we leased from the Ute Water Conservancy District. So you can see that in August, it helped to bring it up to closer to where it needed to be. So the proposed method of acquisition would be a 5-year lease. The amount of water to be leased would be up to 350 acre-feet a year. We would negotiate the terms, including the timing of releases, price and payment to the county for the leased water. We would need to obtain approval of the lease by the Bureau of Reclamation, And we would include a process for consulting each year on whether the county wants to exercise the lease and on whether we think we will need the water. In-stream flow rule 6 lists several factors that the board has to consider when considering a proposed acquisition. This is the first meeting in a 2-meeting process under Rule 6. And I neglected to mention that we have provided notice to the in-stream flow subscription mailing list and to the substitute water supply plan notification list of this proposal. So I will go through the factors. They don't all apply because this is a release of water that was stored in priority, unlike some acquisitions that are of direct flow water rights. So the factors that are not at issue because of that are historical use and return flows and the potential for material injury to existing water rights. This lease will promote the maximum utilization of waters of the state by being beneficially used in the 15-mile reach for in-stream flows to support the recovery of the endangered fish, and then by being available for use downstream of the 15-mile reach. The proposed lease does not negatively impact any interstate compact. As far as stacking leased water with existing in-stream flows, we can combine or stack the leased water with the existing in-stream flow water right to achieve a greater level of protection for the natural environment, and that would be helping to meet those U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service flow recommendations. We've consulted with the Division 5 division engineer, and he has indicated that release and delivery of this leased water from Rudai down to the 15-mile reach will be administrable, assuming that the Bureau of Reclamation approves it. And the anticipated benefits is that it will bring flows up to our decreed in-stream flow rates. It'll help meet those Fish and Wildlife Service flow recommendations, benefiting that endangered fish habitat, and it will further the goals of the recovery program. So the cost to complete the transaction, the county has offered to lease the Rudai water to CWCB for year 1 for $40 per acre foot. Year 2, it would go up to $45 per acre foot. And then in years 3 to 5, the price would be increased by 2% above the preceding year's price. I want to note that this is, we would only pay for the water that we requested to be released and used. This is not a take and pay sort of transaction. This price, the county has told us this price reflects the annual O&M costs incurred under their contract and a small return on their investment in purchasing that water, which cost a lot of money. CWCB maximum expenditure over the 5 years, if it used the 350 acre feet each year, would be $78,915.33. And we'd pay for it with Species Conservation Trust Fund money. House Bill 151277 authorized $500,000 for leases of water for in-stream flows for endangered fish recovery purposes. To date, we've spent about over $271,000 on leases of Rudai water from the Ute District, so that leaves about $228,000 available. So we still have money available for that. Lee Leavenworth, a consultant to the Board of Commissioners of Garfield County, is here if you have questions for him. Otherwise, we would just ask you to consider acquiring this contractual interest in water offered by Garfield County for the short-term lease, and identify any questions for staff or for the county. Under Rule 6, within 20 days from this board meeting, any member of the public can request a hearing on the acquisition. If no hearings requested, we would most likely bring this proposal back to the board for final action at the January board meeting.
Thank you, Linda. Are there any questions for Linda or for Lee about the project, or about the proposal? Linda, I asked you this on the phone, but I'd like to go ahead and ask you now. Can you say how this compares to the price of the other leases that we're currently engaged in?
Yes, and I think I was better prepared to answer it when I talked to you on the phone than I am right now. However, I will say that The price is it's more than what the Ute District charged us, but it's far less than what the River District charged for the water.
I think you also mentioned that it was only pay for what we take.
Yes, we would only pay for the water we use and not be required to pay for the full 350 acre feet if we did not request its release for use.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Director Jan. No one. Director Schwartz.
If there are no further questions, I would make a motion.
We are not taking action.
No, I'm not taking action.
No.
And then I will offer a comment. I appreciate the depth of the information and also the fact that the releases are going to be monitored and being consistent with the needs of the Frying Pan River. So, thanks.
Yes, thank you, Linda, for bringing stuff like this to us. I think it's a great idea.
Thank you.
Okay, agenda item 26, which is the notice of recommended, that's how that word sounds, recommended 2020 in-stream flow appropriations. Rob.
Hello, for the record, Rob Veal, CWCB staff. I'm presenting item number 26, notice of 2020 recommended ISF appropriations. This is an informational item only. No board action is required at this time. Pursuant to Rule 5C, staff provided notice to the in-stream flow subscription mailing list that at the January or March 2020 board meeting, staff may recommend the board form its intent to appropriate up to 20 in-stream flow recommendations. As detailed in the board memo, these recommendations are located within Water Divisions 1, 2, 4, and 6. And these recommended in-stream flow segments are in yellow in the map, and they're going to be really hard for you guys to see that far away. And but just to let you know, during this past year, staff has visited and conducted field work on each of these recommended reaches. Staff has also done public outreach, including meetings with county commissioners and other various stakeholders. And the water availability analysis for each of these recommendations is nearly complete, and staff is working with the recommended entities on finalizing recommended flow amounts, and staff will be preparing the executive summaries. That's all I have for you today about this item, but I can answer any questions if you have any.
Are there any questions for Rob about the 2020 in-stream flow recommendations? Great. Thank you, Rob.
Okay.
We're all questioned now.
I will move on to, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe I should come last all the time. So this is your last item for this meeting. It's once again Rob Veal, CWCB staff. This is agenda item 27, proposed revision to appropriation dates on Disappointment Creek ISF appropriation. You probably thought you were all done with these two ISF appropriations. Sorry to disappoint you. No, sorry. That was my dad joke for this for this item. Dad jokes aside, I'll take out the rest so we can skip ahead. I just provided a quick timeline. This is in your memo, just kind of give you an idea of where this request germinated from. The CWCB formed its intent to appropriate two segments in January of 2019. In February 26th, Dolores County filed an application to meet its future needs on Disappointment Creek with an appropriation date of July 1st, 2010. In March, Dolores County filed a notice to contest. As their application moved further along in the process, they withdrew their notice to contest in September. And on September 17th, Dolores County submitted a proposed decree with the Water Court, but they had reassigned the appropriation dates to February 26, 2019, per recommendation from Division of Water Resources. On September 18th, the next day, we came before you and asked you to take final action on both of these segments and assign an appropriation date of January 29th, 2019. On that same day, the Division 7 Water Court issued a final decree to Dolores County. So apparently Division 7 works really fast. So we're here today. It was always staff's intention to have this in-stream flow be junior to those future needs of Dolores County. So we're coming to you today, and staff Staff recommends that the board pursuant to Rule 5F modify the appropriation date of the two segments of Disappointment Creek from January 29th, 2019 to September 18th, 2019, and that is the date of final action of these ISF appropriations. So that is staff's recommendation, and I can ask any question and try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rob. Director Hawkins.
Thank you, Rob. With a note that this is one way of resolving 1023B and future use road water claims, and that Dolores County has been great to work with, I would move to approve staff recommendation on item 27.
It's been moved by Director Hawkins and seconded by Director Yon to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 27. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we will vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Rob. Okay, everyone, we did it. We are at the end. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. It's been moved by Director Goebel and seconded by literally everyone, but we'll give it to Director Schwartz to adjourn this meeting. Thank you all for your thoughts and good work over the last couple of days. Oh, is there any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. See you in January. I have all my